And we're going to see the leaders and the decks and the bans even for these two players. Obviously, they have different lineups. They're playing against different lineups from yesterday, different players as well. So the strategy changes a tiny bit. They have to try and look for what's the better matchups they have, what to ban, what's scarier to face. And we're going to see the bans in just a second. But the leaders are fairly standard. Kraken Crate does get banned. Again, a very consistent deck Skellige, one of the better factions in the meta right now. But Brand does go through. We saw in the last series as well, finally. This Brand discard deck is very strong coming through. And the Brewer ban instead for Colomoan.
Yeah, I think the Brewer ban is a fair ban. Colomoan, he did feel like his Shoop lists specifically were more favored against Tailbot, and I think Tailbot clearly agrees because he's banned one of those, that Brewer Shoop list, taking it away. And in terms of the strategy, I do think, fair bans by both players. They do now know the lists, and we'll definitely see some very targetable or targeted bans going forward. But let's have a little bit of a peek at those lists, and we can see Tailbot's lists here. He will be playing that Woodland Spirit, Morven, and most interestingly, I think the Hensel. Yeah,
the Hensel is quite interesting. Has that kind of the multiply effect from the Revenant and the Drog as well in the last round. So we talked about Tailbot. I think his strategy is to kind of play us on red coin, give up round 1 pretty early on, I think, and then force his opponent to try and bleed him in round 2. And that's the point where, sure, you don't have the great, long round 3 to finish with Drog, for example, and get a ton of points, but your opponent has, goes into that chance where you can lose a card and then you're a card up anyway. So even if you don't have your great, kind of what you want to do in round 3, you still have a card more. So you're almost always going to win. So that's Tailbot's strategy, I think, with that deck right there.
Yeah, and it's a similar strategy to the one we saw with the Filavandrel list, just executed a little bit differently, and definitely the kind of deck you tend to see when the player is going second. If we have a little bit of a look, however, at Colomoan's lists, we can see some interesting cards there. He opted to tech a lot of artifact removal, and actually no artifacts in the side of Tailbots. Do you think that's going to hurt him?
It's a bit suboptimal, but I think right now in Gwent, the artifact removal is valued pretty fairly. I think you're not losing too much. It's not kind of that binary in the terms of points and the provisions it costs. But we do see 2 Shoop lists, which is pretty, I like it in a tournament setting. You can guarantee the red coin, you can guarantee. It's a very lopsided deck. You have some really good cards like Shoop and some really bad cards because you're playing one-ofs in all your bronzes, basically. So you can throw away some cards with a current draw system in rounds 1 and 2 and then have a pretty good hand for round 3, for example. And I think that is Colomoan's strategy. Whereas Queen Meave is a more of a blue coin deck, probably has a very compensated amount of value in all their cards, basically. It's very balanced, basically.
Yeah, I think Shoop is one of these lists where if the faction has a lot of bronze cards with a similar amount of value, that is the kind of faction where you typically see Shoop, and that's why we're seeing things like Scoia'tael and things like Nilfgaard with these Shoop lists. Whereas, Skellige, there's a lot of good bronzes, but there's some bad bronzes, and Monster's very, very synergistic bronzes, so that's somewhere there it tends to avoid. The brown list, though, from Colomoan, he says he feels like that is his weak point here, and that's the one he may struggle to find the win-win.
The good thing is, though, is it's very consistent. So if your opponent draws badly, you're always going to draw your whole deck. You always have full control over all your draws. It thins down to 0 because of Coral, because of the leader. Of course, it is a discard leader. So it's very consistent. If your opponent is a little bit unlucky, you'll have the chance to draw just a tiny bit better and get some great value from your cards and win the game because of it. But also important to note, Colomoan is on red coin. He's going to start off probably with a Shoop deck, possibly. We'll find out. Definitely not with Queen Meave. I think that's a pretty clear signal. Whereas Tailbot has blue coin, so he's in a bit of an unfavorable position at the beginning, at least.
Although Tailbot, I think he does expect Queen Meave on blue, so he may sequence his decks in such a way that he can find favorable matchups versus the Queen Meave. And queuing into your opponent when when you're going first or when you're going second, there's a lot of strategy involved in how you sequence these decks in terms of finding the matchups where you have the edge. And both of these players, veterans of the game. Colomoan, he practices against himself because clearly no other person is on his level. There's going to be some very spicy Gwent coming up very shortly.
A lot of viewers see, I think, the skill in Gwent as just sequencing correctly and knowing when to pass, etc. in the game, but I think just as important is the deck building aspect of the game, trying to bring the best deck possible for the meta. And then when you're in the tournament itself, knowing how to play around your opponent's decks, knowing when to queue certain decks on blue and red coin. So it's a lot more abstract talents that you have to have as a very good Gwent player. I think both of these players have proven just statistically they've done very, very well on ladder and in tournaments, so they definitely have the full package. We'll see who has the better chance in this matchup. It's going to be a very close one, I think. Might be just a 5-game series, but we'll find out very soon. Both players getting ready. Dandelion, of course, assisting.
Yeah, he's an expert at Gwent. He knows exactly how to get set up and get into a game, and impressive considering I don't think they had computers in Novigrad.
Well, he's been offered a lot of rounds of Gwent, I think. Companion to Geralt, obviously a big fan of the game. So I think he definitely knows what he's talking about. I mean, the digital aspect, not so much, but the basics he has under control.
Yeah, he seems pretty sorted. What do you expect? What do you expect from Tailbot to open with? He's on blue.
I think it's not going to be. I mean, it could be Henselt, but probably not, because you can get. He wants to try and pass early, and you can't really do that if you don't have control of the round one in the blue coin, obviously. So.
Oh, there you go, Henselt.
Well, it is Henselt. So he is on blue coin. We do see the red coin on Morvran, and that will be Shoop Morvran coming in for Colomon for game one. We mentioned it on red coin is what he wanted to queue it into, and he's going to get that here.
Yeah, and we see the mulligans there by both players, taking a little bit of time to decide what it is they want to keep. Talbot with the extra mulligan because he is going first. So if you're going first, you actually get an extra mulligan as a little bit of a bonus to try and improve your hand. And speaking to the players, they feel like the going first versus going second, there isn't that much of a disparity in terms of advantage.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot less binary, I think, now with the homecoming revamp for Gwent. I think the archetypes in general and the matchups are a lot less binary, and also the coin. I think it's been fixed to a certain extent. So there's still some gameplay that relies on having blue coin or red coin, but for the most part, I think it is quite fair and balanced, especially when you have control and you know what's coming. It's not a surprise like it is on ladder, for example.
That's fair to say. And here we do see the new spectator mode for Gwent available at the moment just in tournaments, but maybe in the future available to you guys too. And here we are. Say hello, Panda.
Hello, is this how you do it?
Yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you say hello.
I don't speak mouse, sorry.
Oh, well, there you go. That's your problem. So this is the new spectator, and we'll be able to kind of guide you guys through the plays. And Talbot deciding what he wants to open. And he, like he said to us, you know, this round, he's not necessarily looking to spend that much. So a Lyrian Arbalest there, I think, is a okay choice just to play a, you know, a bronze card. It's got a little bit of engine capabilities, but, you know, it's not really scary.
It could be buffed to 8 to give it a bit more survivability against some of these damage effects, but then you have cards like Leo Bonhart, kills a unit that's over 8 power, so that would be very risky, and also killing an engine, so even more value taken away from Talbot's game plan. So it's always a hard decision to make at the beginning of round one if you're on blue coin.
Yeah, the tactical advantage, you can utilize it to protect something, but often the things like the Arbalest, it doesn't really matter too much if they get removed, so spending it on something like that, not quite so important. We see the Witcher trio here coming out, playing one, summoning the other two from your deck, a very common card. We see, you know, another Witcher here on the side of Henselt and Talbot, so like I said, very staple. And we see the Roach coming out. So for those of you guys who are a bit new, when you play a gold card, you summon Roach. So these three often mulligan fodder, just because if you have Roach and 3 Witches in hand, you can't thin any of them from your deck. And then you're going to be a sad panda.
Also very important UI distinctions with Homecoming. Now you can see the leader charges over here with the times, whatever it is. Here you have 3 charges on Morvran, and also the amount of cards in hand, just for a quick glance and know exactly how much. You know, for those NA mathers out there, it's much easier to count if you can just get the number right away. Yeah,
it keeps them set. And we see Talbot deciding what to spend here. Like I said, he's maybe not looking to spend too much. Maybe even, you know, there's the Witchers which you can thin. So that is a bigger spend in the, you know, it's 9, but that does improve your hands for the future. So sometimes people will hold Witchers, but very typically you see them played out in this first round. And, you know, thinning all of those cards out of your deck is going to help you to find the cards that you need. Although Draug, one of the key components of this deck in hand.
That's always a good thing. You also have a bronze card, Venon's Elite. Not played very often, because it is a Shoop list, you have to kind of try and find these bronzes that can fit your deck without repeating any. So with Morvran, it is pretty good. You can use lead ability pretty much whenever you need to. It's not a one-time use either, so you have the chance to get the full 6 value from it.
Those are not some bad choices. I think the Selkirk especially is a great thing to throw in the bin. Treyhern just takes your favorite thing, just puts it in the bin, and this is the choice here. The Trebuchet, though, does deny a little bit of Henselt, but yeah, Selkirk, I think, was the obvious choice.
They are fine, but they're not really win conditions either, so I think Talbot won't be too worried. We saw yesterday the Imlerith being destroyed instead, so that was kind of a major win condition for Pro-Neo yesterday. In this case, it's a good value play, Treyhern.
Yep.
I think it gets its full provision cost by a tiny bit, but still not game-winning either, so an okay play here from Colomon.
Yeah, I think these decks, this deck especially, there aren't too many cards that are really, you know, key components. Draug, I think, probably would have been slightly worse than losing the Selkirk. And losing the Selkirk, it is still a big amount of value. Although he's only 5 points, he fights whoever you choose to target, so he can easily see 10 points of value.
Now with only a 3-point play at the very beginning with the Arbalest there, Talbot has to be careful. He has a tactical advantage to help him out, but he has to play kind of high tempo if he's scared of his opponent keeping up. Obviously on blue coin, if you lose on even, that's a huge disadvantage going into round 2, because your opponent can bleed freely if you want, or get an extra card back from you if you go, you know, low enough with your cards in hand. Botchling is a good play to make though. 5 points, 1 point every turn, starting from the turn you play it, and just a good engine to have. Yep. Although Nilfgaard is known for locks.
That's true. You do also have that option with the Botchling to transform it. If you are a lubber, not a fighter, you can turn it into a lubberkin, and it will start to boost units on your side of the board rather than damage units on their side of the board.
Tactical advantage still not used. There's not really a kind of a rush to use it. Sometimes you just let it stay in hand. Some cards like Leo Bonhart in the hand for Kolomoen are obviously you don't get that chance to use it that early. It kind of changes the sequencing a tiny bit. It's not better in a way, but it just doesn't really matter too much until you need to use it. At this point now, you can heal the Arbalest up to 6, gets out of the Leo Bonhart range, lets it survive, and I think that's a pretty good play from Tailbot, I think, if he does make it here.
But I mean, we spoke to Tailbot, and he did talk about this round 1 not always mattering, but the way this game is turning out, it kind of looks like he does care about this round 1 and may intend to play at this crucial 7-card mark where sometimes you see the pass, because he didn't use that tactical advantage. And if he's not using the tactical advantage, it's usually that he's saving it for later, because if he intended to pass, playing the tactical advantage forces your opponent to spend more on round 1.
Not only that, he has already a great last rate lined up in the melee row. He could say, I'm going to play a bit more into this. I'm not scared of losing the point advantage I have here because I have a great catch-up mechanic with the last rate already set up. And yeah, he goes and buffs the Arbalest, keeps it alive while still not putting it into that 8-point range that Leo Bonhart could kill it instantly. And pretty strong play from Tailbot, very big point gap already.
Yep. And speaking of that last rate, you see this card here, Reinforced Trebuchet. Play it on the range row, and every turn it's going to shoot the opponent's range row. And while at the moment we only see the 1-point Wolfpack on the range row, what this does is it discourages Kolomoen from playing into that row and causes him to stack the front row more, which in turn plays into that Lacerate.
Yeah, it's a very bit more of a subtle synergy, not as obvious as others like Unicorn and Kyronex. You mentioned it yesterday, but still at this level, every player trying to get the maximum advantage from every single card, trying to make the deck that makes the most sense together, that's more cohesive. And in this case, Tailbot, I think, has made a pretty good one. Hansel has been pretty strong in the tournament till now. I think he's the only player to bring it, actually.
Yep, absolutely the only Hensel, and a very interesting deck to watch. And I feel like with these tournament decks, it's intriguing because it does actually affect the ladder, and we tend to see already Phil Evangels out there, but also maybe some more Hensels coming forward. Although some of these decks are very much designed only for tournaments and don't always do quite as well on the ladder as people expect them to.
See, Kolomoen's strategy, he's on red coin, he has a chance to throw away some of his less useful cards, I think. He did a thinning, that was a big burst play with the Witchers and the Roach, that is true, but the thinning is also kind of carryover value in a way to add more consistency for later. And then also now just throwing away some weaker bronze cards. We see the Wolfpack, obviously not the flashiest of plays in Gwent at the moment. Very basic 2 for 2, and the Nausicaa Brigade as well. It's okay. Gets the full value here, but nothing too flashy. They want to save for round 3, for example. Yeah,
with this shoot list, if you don't intend or don't expect to win a round, just making these plays and forcing your opponent to commit more is pretty nice. If you can't mulligan them, play them when you don't intend to win. That's more or less how this works. And I think Kolomoen very much expects the Lacerate here, given this kind of state of the board, and he's not looking to invest too much when currently, you have the 12-point Lacerate available whenever you like.
I'm almost running out here. Tailbot takes it to the very limit. I think he knows he doesn't really have to spend too much here to win this round at this point. He knows what Kolomoen's strategy is in general. He knows he's probably not going to fight for this round too hard. So he doesn't want to spend this Lacerate just yet, because if he wins the round, he can dry pass into a long round 3 with the Revenants and with Draug, sure, but also with the Lacerate that could be, 14 points of value maybe, or even more.
For sure, I agree. I think it's a fair play. And now we're starting to get towards that point where 4 cards. We talked about 7 cards, now we talk about 4 cards. When you go below 4 cards, it means that you won't have 10 cards for the final round. You draw 3, you draw 3. 3 plus 3 plus 3, it's 9, it's not 10. So there's the pass, and we're not even going to get to that 4 card point.
And now Tailbot has won round 1. Kolomoen gave it up, but he has now full control over how this game continues. He can go for a bleed in round 2. He can go for a dry pass in round 2 after passing, or playing a few cards that he doesn't really want to have for round 3, and go to, like you said, that 7 card number, and then go for a very long round 3 with Revenants, with Draug, and with Lacerate. And there isn't really a Gimpy Gerwin in the deck, for example, for Kolomoen, which is a great counter to the Revenants.
Yeah, Gimpy Gerwin damaging all copies of your opponent's card, and Draug creating copies of the Kidweni Revenant, which we actually see also a version of here in the Hand of Hensel. So very nice to ping down all of those 3-point units and kill them all. And we see the pass and opting for the extra mulligan out of Tailbot. Tailbot, 8 cards in hand, going to draw 2 rather than 3, and the extra draw turns into an extra mulligan.
And of course, because these points don't matter as long as you have 1 point on the board to win the round, you're okay. For Kolomoen, he wants to go for this carryover value, plays the Infiltrator that now kind of reduces the consistency in Tailbot's decks and his mulligans for round 3. There we see it.
And opting actually to draw, again, into an extra mulligan rather than playing something like that Venedal Elite. So valuing the mulligan more than the draw.
Now we'll see the one counter there is if Shoop plays Dragon's Dream into a row where the Revenants are multiplying, that could get a full value Dragon's Dream and also take away a ton of points, but it is very risky, and you have to draw into Shoop as well if you're Colomoan.
You got to find that Shoop if you want the list. And his draws there, not exactly what you want to see. We saw the Alba Armor Cavalry and the Magni division. He may be Magni, but he is not magnificent in terms of the draws.
There's one more draw left, and he does find the Shoop on the very last draw there. He does have, like we mentioned, the Witchers and the Roach helped the consistency in the draws later on, so that is one of the reasons he might have drawn into that Shoop anyway, but pretty lucky nonetheless. It was a chance to not draw it, that's for sure.
We talked there about extra draws versus extra mulligans, and that extra mulligan finding him the Shoop, but then meaning he does hold on to things like the Venadal Elite. We see a Nilfgaardian Knight here. It's a really nice early play because it boosts an enemy unit by 2. If you play it first and there's no enemies, then you just get a 6-point play, and it's pretty efficient, I would say.
Yeah, similar to Marauder in Skellige. It's that play that you kind of want to make on the blue coin on the proactive play, and you get the full points of your end. Well, Marauder's on the reactive play, so it's the opposite.
It's his arch nemesis, shall we say. So, Tailbot deciding exactly how it is he wants to play into this round. He does have that Henselt available on a variety of targets, actually. I believe the Lyrian Cavalry is one, and the Revenant, Kidweni Revenant we see here is the other one. So he does have value in, he has to decide, what he's going to go for. I think probably the Kidweni.
There's a big difference in the cards you play in Gwent. You have the engines that you want to play early. You have the mid-range cards that don't really depend on the board state or on how early you play them. You don't lose value if you play them later. And you have kind of the finisher cards like Lacerate that depend, the later you play them, the better. So it's always going to be, kind of a sequencing thing with the players to try and play their cards in the right order all the time.
But you know what? Something that is a little bit worrisome in terms of this Revenant strategy is Orcs. Orcs will lock an enemy unit. However, if you have Seret in your hand, you're locking every copy of that unit on their hand, deck, and on the board. And I think this is going to be a game of patience, as Colomoan needs to wait for Draug before he starts locking Revenants. But Tailbot is able to set up 2 Revenants with his leader ability. We see Seret in hand, so we know that Orcs can lock everything. But, is it going to be too late?
And it's hard to kind of be that patient, because the earlier you play the Revenants, the better. They can start multiplying much quicker, get a lot more value. But if you're too greedy, like you said, there are counters still in the hand for Colomoan, and you can shut down the strategy altogether. So we'll see how the players end up sequencing. It's a very long round, so there's going to be a lot of mind games, a lot of thought put into every single play that's going to be made here. We've seen a lot of 1-point games till now in this tournament. It could be another one, or even a draw. I'm not going to jinx it, but
don't curse it, Panda.
It's a possibility.
There's enough with the Crimson Curse. We don't need any more curses. We see the Alba Armor Cavalry there utilized in order to lock the Lyrian Cavalry, so deny that engine. But with this kind of list, there are a few more Lyrians up Tailbot's sleeve, and we see another Arbalist on the board there, gaining a charge and shooting your opponents whenever you play a card with orders.
And both leaders available, all 3 charges for more rent, so 6 extra points, and also some more survivability for that Chironex Unicorn combo we've been seeing the whole tournament. In this case, only Unicorn in hand, so not too important. Whereas Henselt has his kind of burst and zeal potential with some of the bronzes.
Yeah, we actually see the Morvan charge there coming out, used to check out a card in the Henselt list and boost up a unit on that Alba Armor Cavalry. And why do you think that is?
Not sure.
Yeah, usually utilized to...
Well, it's to use the Venom Elite, actually, because you have to use it this turn.
That's true.
Able to kill the Lyrian Arbalist, so we mentioned this bronze not being played very often, but already finds 6 or 5 value, and also shuts down an engine for Tailbot, which is, it's massive. It's a great amount of points for a bronze card that's definitely proven to have a lot of value in this deck for Colomoan. Yeah,
on the flip side, though, you do have to spend that leader to, on something, and if you don't have something that you want to protect, often we see it used, for example, on a Unicorn or a Chironex, then the Alba Cavalry, he's getting pretty buff today. It's a gym day. He's looking pretty good.
And of course, now in the semifinal, all players know each other's deck lists, so they know exactly where they can find maximum value. And Tailbot knows that when Vincent, the maximum value is going to find is on a 6, like the Nilfgaardian Knight, like the Lethel, or even on Shoop, possibly if it rolls into the 8, in the 8 base powered unit. But in this case, I think it's pretty good value. And we talked about the sequencing mattering a lot. You play your engines first, and then kind of the cards you don't really care about too much. However, it does play into the Slave Infantry, transforming an allied unit into a Slave Infantry. And what is a better target than a 1-strength body, which is created by the Vincent? So not surprising to see that play, hitting the board at this point. The Slave Infantry, you want to find those 1-point bodies, the low-value bodies. And as soon as you do,
There's no real harm in playing it unless you're concerned about, say, a Gimpy, but again, you're deckless, so you're not really that concerned.
And there's not much you can do. You have to play Slave Energy at some point, so that's what it is. And Vincent the same. The ability, you can't make it a different. It's the ability it is. You can't change that. So there's not much way to counter or play around that if you're Tailbot either.
That is true. Now Tailbot deciding where it is he wants to go from here. We do see that front row getting stacked, which is, like we said, fairly common against the trebuchets. Vest coming down there, utilized to deal damage, but not only does she deal damage, she is a pretty multifaceted lady. Order giving an ally zeal, so she can make another unit be able to be triggered the turn that it is played.
And that unit could be a Revenant. There's currently a 1-point unit on the board for Kolomoan, so a great target, and if it's given zeal, it can just instantly get that damage off as well.
And then he gets a friend.
And Ox is still in hand, so it gets risky.
That's the thing, it gets risky, but there's also Draug in Tailbot's hand, and this is one of these games where it could go either way, and both players kind of taking their time a little bit here. It's been a kind of slow paced going into this final round, but we're definitely going to see tactics and counter tactics start to ramp up as the match goes forward.
There's Kolomoan playing around the Revenants, buffing up that Alba Armored Cavalry up to 3 again, so not going to be at that 1 strength we talked about. The Revenant could have been a great target for this. Yeah, but Slave Driver comes down and kills the Vest anyway, so...
He's really working out, He's getting really buff. He's got buffed twice. This never, ever happens. Slave Driver, playing here, I think, is fine. It does, deal more damage the more locks there are on the board, but then you need to have targets to lock, and at the moment there's no target. So in terms of the state of Kolomoan's hand, I think this is a fine spend.
Card is a very interesting art. It's actually a photoshopped meme of myself as this Whipmaster. I mean, so that'll have to come up at some point in my life.
That's accurate. That is an accurate portrayal. You're
I'm a nice guy,
bit of a slave driver. Bit of a slave driver. We actually also see Letho here in the hand of Kolomoan, and this is another lock option, provided you hold on to Orcs. So there's a lot of options for shutting down these Revenants should Kolomoan feel the need.
And Kolomoan clearly playing around the trebuchet, stacking that front row. Normally, we kind of do an even split just to play around possible, wide row damaging effects like Lacerate. So in this case, playing around one evil, but playing into another. So not much Kolomoan can do. It's kind of, the risk you have to take at this point, and Lacerate is in hand for Tailbot. He doesn't know it's in the deck. It could not be drawn, though.
Yeah, we see Margarita there on the side of Hensel of Tailbot, utilized to lock a unit, and I doubt we'll actually see that lock. As we mentioned, it plays into slave drivers, and if you don't have a target, it's not very useful. But what she does provide that something like Doragure doesn't is she's orders. So she has Zeal herself, but she's also an order, which means it synergizes with cards that trigger from orders. So like the Lyrian Cavalry, for example.
And it's just the lock unit in Northern Realms. Every kind of faction has its own specific lock unit that does something that normally synergizes with the faction. In this case, it's Margarita. And not only that, she's also a human, so she has a chance to synergize with Draug as well. Kind of that added bonus in the Hensel list.
I think Doragure, he's pretty human too. You can't just write him off there. Unicorn being utilized here to boost up the slave driver there and make him a little bit bigger, but not too big. And because it's in the back row, that means that it's time for the trebuchet.
Finally, it can be released into the wild.
Superior siege equipment that can fire projectiles of 90 kilos at least 300 meters. And this looks about to be 300 meters away.
1 point of damage, I don't know how superior that is. A little bit on the low side for me, at least.
Yeah, so you heard it here first. We're going to maybe see a trebuchet buff to bring them to the level that they deserve to be.
And Lacerate's looking very juicy in that front row. For Tail, we're going to see the cards that are left in the decks. Actually, it's pretty interesting to see, what players can't access in this game, what they've missed out on. The Chironex, the Asire, Leo Bonheart, some pretty strong plays. In this matchup, maybe not too much. Draug is at 7 strength, not 8. And Henselt, or Tailbot's list, missing the Geralt of Rivia. Again, this also matchup, not a great card, really, in this matchup.
Yeah, in this matchup, unless you see something go tall, in terms of the boost, then you're not going to see value. And this is why we see the Unicorn buffing something like the Slave Driver, because you don't make it up to that sweet spot, 8 points of value, where Geralt can instantly kill it. Geralt, he's a fighter, but he's only going to fight big guys. Like, none of these wimpy dudes, like the Slave Driver.
Letho comes out, locks a trebuchet, so maybe not so superior after all. Gets locked by a mere mortal man.
He's a Witcher.
Oh, that's pretty mortal to me, though. I think he can definitely die. We can try out someday, but...
Yeah, locking up that trebuchet, and Kolomoan then deciding to start playing into the back row as he realizes that he's got more locks than he maybe needs to deal with, and starting to counter that Lacerate to a certain extent.
There's a big gap of points. I mean, 20-point gap. Shoop's still in hands with some strong plays still left for Kolomoen. 1 leader charge as well. Tailbot has a leader to Answer, to be a much better. In general, it's only 1 charge, but a very powerful one for Henselt. Brings out a bronze copy of a unit and also gives it Zeal. Going to be used here in this case on the Revenant we talked about before. And you can also kill your own units. We're probably going to see that happen here. Trebuchet, definitely not the superior machine we're talking about.
Inferior siege equipment. I thought it was good,
being killed by
I've been misled.
by a ghost man with a shield. That is pretty pathetic, if you ask me.
I'm very disappointed. I'm very disappointed. But a nice little play there. You know, the Kidweni Revenants, they are pretty indiscriminate in terms of who they target. But there are, 3 of them on the board here. And Orcs, you've got to make that decision in terms of how you play. You know, you can't play Seret first if you want to lock multiple targets. You have to hold on to Seret, which means the choice here really is Orcs or Shoop. But then if you play that Orcs, that's when the Draug starts to become viable. Although only a couple humans on the side of Henselt. 3 if you include Shayla once she gets played.
And still a very large point gap. Last rate will catch up for the most part. Going to be 10 points in that front row.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a mountain, especially with the Shoop. You know, Shoop often sees about 12 points. That's typically where you expect the value. You've got 2 points also in the pocket with Morvran, so plus the 8 from Seret, 22 more points, I would say, roughly on the side of Kolomoen. And Lacerate is good, but it's going to kind of come down to how these Revenants ping.
Of course, Red Coin was in favor of Kolomoen. He kind of brought the deck he wanted to bring to have an advantage in this matchup. So, in theory, if the players are very similarly skilled, they should be winning the Red Coin matchups for the most part. So, if Tailbot can take this one, it's a huge swing in the whole series. You can, start off with a Blue Coin win and then move on to his own Red Coin deck and have a bit of an advantage there as well. So, we'll see what he can do here.
Yep, hovering the Shayla to show you guys it there, expecting it to be played, get that human on the board. Then you typically see the Draug and then the Lacerate, I would imagine. Lacerate allowing you to set up those 1-point units. Shayla deals 2 damage when you deploy her, and you can tell her to deal another 2 damage. She's got that order ability too, so not only is she a human, but you can use her to get that extra damage out. And again, set up those 1s. And what do you need to set up 1s? You need 3s, and I see quite a few 3s over there on the side of Kolomoen's board. So those Revenants, I think, don't discount them, but there will, only be, there'll be 3. Yeah, I think only 3 will trigger because they take a turn to sort themselves out, figure out what's going on.
It'll be a pretty huge point swing, though. We'll see if it's enough. Shoop, obviously a bit of a random effect. You have the chance to choose 3 out of the 5 from the category you choose. You're gonna see a Night Blade here. Lock a unit, boost an ally by 4, and gain Resilience. Resilience not very useful in round 3. Round 4s are not yet in Gwent. Boost an ally by 4. Like you said, a solid 12 points. The boost not going to be that effective. Guild of Rivia hasn't been drawn. You can take away 1 of the 3s in the front row, though.
Yeah, and that boost also actually does, it avoids the Geralt on the target, but he's an 8 strength boy himself. He's a big boy, and it depends really what you put your opponent on. Like you said, you can't play around it, but I don't think at this point you're putting your opponent necessarily on Geralt, especially against the Morvran, where it's harder to find those tall units. I think it's likely that you would expect the Lacerate, given the way the first round went, and maybe the Draug.
There's another 3 made in that front row. Draug can come down. Morvran can't play around, well, he can boost 1 of the 3s actually, so the Lacerate won't be a direct counter. And that's a whole lot of Revenants.
Yeah, but 1 of them will die to Seret. Seret, he takes no prisoners, deals exactly 3 damage if there's no Orcs in hand. So pinging off 1 of those means we're only going to probably see 2 little Revenant babies.
The Revenants do have reach, important to note as well. So these back row Revenants cannot be hitting this back row for Kolomoen. There's the buff onto 1 of the 3s in the front row.
Yeah, not the Alba Cavalry. He's tired. He's having a rest day.
It was too big already. Got too thick. Can't get thicker than Tailbot, right? That's impossible.
That is in fact impossible. And still, a hefty 10-point play there, plus the 2 Revenants pinging off 2 more of those 1-point units and spawning little friends.
It's going to be very close, but not close enough. Kolomoen, like we said, it's going to be, a game of very few points. 2 points here instead of 1, but still an incredibly close game. Both players know exactly what to do to try and get the maximum points there, but Tailbot, in the end, just 2 points less than Kolomoen.
Yeah, and we have seen so many of these matches going down to small numbers of points. And, I think Homecoming, it has brought the game to a much kind of closer field. You don't see as often these massive point swings. And considering the quality of these decks, players have really brought high quality decks that definitely, when you look at the numbers, especially in that final round, seem comparable. We're seeing ties, we're seeing 1-point victories, we're seeing these 2-point victories. And, that, I think, is testament to how balanced, I would say, the game is at the moment.
Well, in general, the points per card, also the point swing balance is also very drastically different from Gwent before the full release, before Homecoming. Now all the cards have been, at least the point values have been toned down a bit, where it's not, that 20 or 30 point swings. Instead, just the general value and the points per bronze and per gold have been toned down. So we're going to see a lot closer games, to, be very close. Like we saw here, a 2-point game, and we've seen draws. We've seen 1-point games, 2 in a row actually yesterday. So definitely get used to it if you're a viewer for very close nail-biting matches.
Yep, and I would imagine that from Colomoan here, we'll see Meve. He's now going first. He's on the blue side of things. So Queen Meve, I think, is his kind of deck which he prefers for going first. And if Talbot expects that, he can decide which of his lists he wants to play against that kind of more engine and boost-heavy deck.
And Morvran, Nilfgaard considered one of the weaker factions in the meta right now by the pro players. Skellige on the opposite spectrum, the highest rated faction, I think, by most players. So for Colomoan to have the win already on Morvran, I think is pretty good news for him.
Yep.
Although he did say that Bran, I think, was his least favorite deck in general against Talbot's decks specifically. So the context matters.
Yep.
But still, a win with Morvran. If I was playing Nilfgaard, I would be very happy to not have to deal with Morvran any longer.
Yeah, the Bran. It's actually Colomoan. He said he may struggle with that one, and Talbot, he said it's okay. I'll just beat Bran 3 times. But if you get into that situation, 0-2 down, that's where you're going to have to sweat a little bit, because every one of those games matters. And if one of those Bran matches gets through, you're out, son. Peace, go home.
Both players thinking about their strategy here. Of course, the strategy kind of changes on the fly. If you win or lose a certain matchup, you want to try and, make the best chance of you winning the next one, and you have to think what your opponent's going to queue as well. So a lot of mind games here. We're going to see the King Brand coming in for Colomoan, and Woodland Spirit, the monster deck, coming in for Talbot on red coin.
Yeah.
Can choose to, really try and push for round 1 and get the last save for round 3, for example.
Yeah, and we talked about those mind games, and the Queen Meve deck, expected to be a blue deck by, I think, Talbot, for example, and Colomoan said he did like it on blue. But if you want to kind of find matchups that confuse your opponent, then sometimes you're going to be playing a deck on, going first or going second, where you wouldn't usually expect it, and that is something that we see here. Look at all those bombs.
See a very it's an interesting matchup, because with King Bran, you almost want to mulligan your finishers and your bad cards for later on, because you have a guaranteed chance to draw pretty much everything. If you play the deck, all the discard it has, you're going to thin to 0. So it's interesting where you want to try and have a bad hand for round 1 to discard cards and then draw into your better cards for later.
Yep, we saw the Hjalmar there being mulliganed on the side of Colomoan, a card that deals damage based on the strength of a unit in your graveyard. If you don't have any units in your graveyard, then it doesn't deal any damage. So, although a gold card and a powerful card, mulligan fodder, I think, in the first round, similar to Sigurdrifa's rights, where she resurrects a warrior, but again, it's graveyard play. You need to set up a graveyard first, and that takes a little bit of time, especially with the discarding and also just ending the round, I suppose.
And the concept that's been in Gwent for a very long time with the Freyas as well, and Skellige back in the day, reviving bronze units, you need to have a graveyard enabled to do that effect. So it makes a lot of sense. We see Yada drawn there for Colomoan.
Yep, Yuda, she's a strong unit, but targetable in this lineup, especially with Talbot's decks. We see Geralt of Rivia, not necessarily in the hand, but in the lineup. So she's not usually played round 1, and may, in fact, get her. She might get a bit slice and dice by Geralt.
And also Imudus Wrath, you can get the full value from the very tall monsters units and take down one of the units for Skellige as well to get a great amount of value for only 8 provisions.
We see a Foglet here on the side of Talbot, and this is an interesting inclusion in this deck, in that the only way that Talbot can trigger the Death Wish is through Brewis. And Colomoan knows this. Colomoan knows the list, so he... if you're a smart fellow, you would think, that probably means that the Brewis is in hand. And often this card is used to kind of bait removal, because your opponent is like, oh, there's a Death Wish, they're going to do something with it, so I'll remove it. But I doubt we'll actually see any damage on that Foglet by Colomoan.
Well, I mean, with King Bran, the damage isn't always targeted. You discard cards, the 1 damage ping comes in, so you can't really decide. With Burner Bran as well, and with Coral, if it's drawn, the same. So sometimes you just put it out there and then say, Foglet, I'm sorry. You're the sacrifice, you're going to die to these random bullets that are raining from the sky, but that's life sometimes. And
those random bullets, if there's only one target, you don't have a choice.
Not that
per
random.
se. And I think discarding and setting up your hand in terms of playing the Skald, dealing 1 damage to Foglet probably isn't the end of the world, although we did talk about these one-point plays and how they may impact things.
Now the Drowner comes out, the Thrive synergy, of course, you want to kind of, count from the very small numbers to the very big numbers on a very complicated strategy for the most part, which is why monsters are so popular, cough, cough. But Wyvern in hand as well, and the Necker Warrior, so a very clear stairway of value to play out here.
If you know how numbers work, you can usually more or less figure out how to trigger those 5s. 3, 2, 3 comes after 2. See, I can't do it. 3 comes after 2, then you play the 4. But then sometimes it's a bit tricky because he's got 2 of these Wyverns in hand, so that's not necessarily going to be a Thrive turn. And similarly, when you have a Necker Warrior plus the Wild Hunt Rider, both of these being 4, you're not triggering as many Thrives as you could potentially based on the state of this hand.
There's a Savage Bear double ping though.
He's a savage.
One going to be used. Second one not going to be used, but instead the tactical advantage buffs it up to 7 to kind of keep that value safe, make sure that those 2 points aren't lost if there's a second rounder played, for example.
And also in terms of that play, the Foglet, you're just triggering another Foglet. You're actually giving him points. You're losing damage because you're only hitting a 1 instead of a 2. And on top of that, you're then thinning Tailbot's deck for him. And Colomon's like, nah, you want the thin? You can get it yourself.
We saw actually a mulligan on a Drowner at the beginning of round 1. We saw it from, he had 2 Drowners in hand, he mulligan 1 because it would kind of disrupt the sequencing you want to do with the Thrive effects. So it's important to have kind of, it seems very easy on paper, and I was, kind of teasing it before, but there's very minute, subtle things that you can do to try and get maximum value, like playing Thrive units early against Bran, for example. The discard pings hit them. You can get that re-Thrive effect with another Wyvern, for example, so you're not losing value at all. So it dissuades the opponent from damaging your Thrive units as well, unless they can kill them, of course.
That is true. Also, we do see the damage from the Wyvern onto this Savage Bear. Wild Hunt Riders, they need to be the biggest boy on your side, and the Bear at 7 points means that the Wild Hunt Riders can't be played and cannot be utilized to thin. So this kind of play is fine. We also have the Naglfar here, the boat of the Wild Hunt, and this allows you to look at 2 random golds in your deck and play one of them. So targeting, you're going to get 2 of these, but you're not necessarily going to get the ones that you want, and there's a lot of choice at the moment in here. Putting the other one, though, at the top of your deck, so improving your draws.
Both players taking a long time to think this through.
I think in terms of Colomon's hand, it's a little bit tricky with these Spores, because Spores, they restore a unit to base power. They're not very good, but they're designed to be played with Coral, who, when you discard a special card, like Spores, deals damage. She deals 2 damage per special card discarded. So having those in hand, but not having Coral, means that he doesn't really have all of the components he wants for the synergy. And, at that point, the question is, do you start spending more on this round? And I think the answer is no.
This is the 1 card played from Tailbot to pass here. I think he is going to want to bleed in round 2, which is why you could have spent multiple cards. As long as he has 4 in hand, it's fine. He just dry passes in round 2 and then goes for a 10-card round 3. But this is a deck that wants to bleed. It has the potential to bleed. It has a chance to play a lot of burst points very quickly in round 3, whereas your opponent might rely on something like Commander's Horn that needs a little bit more time than just 1 or 2 cards played.
Yeah, decent draws on the part of both players. We see some golds in the hand on both sides, but no Coral, which means that Colomon, he's in that position where he's going to have to mulligan these Spores rather than discard them. So then, try and improve the hand, but it's not necessarily what you want to do in terms of the strategy. You lose that synergy with Bran, where if you're discarding cards and Coral, dealing a lot of points of damage every time you discard, you're like I said, you're losing value. But on top of that, you then are in a bit of a pickle, because what does Berna discard? Yes, you can discard the Twirsec Skirmisher, but the rest of this hand, not bad. Maybe the Marauder, depending on whether you're going first or second. In this situation, though, Tailbot won the round, so if Tailbot opts to play here, Colomon's going second, and at that point, it's a pretty okay value play.
Tricky mulligans as well for Tailbot, though. Found the second Wild Hunt Rider, so he can't really play that thinning and the great burst points as well. Almost similar to Witchers, 8 points instead of the 9 from the Witchers and 1 less thinning, but still very valuable to play in round 2. And of course, Wilderness Spirit is the finisher leader for monsters, whereas Garnicora is good over 3 rounds, so she's a bit better on the bleed because you have that fruit and the chance to kind of bleed in round 2. So instead, Tailbot, he goes for the pass. He knows both of these decks don't really have an engine element for the most part. They're mostly just consistent, point slam, mid-range decks instead. So he's not too scared of a round 3 against, long round 3 against King Bran. Against something like a Bruver or an Ada, for example, could be a bit scarier. In this case, not exactly.
And now Colomon has to decide what it is he wants to throw away here. He can play up to 3 cards and still have 10 cards in the final round, but of these cards, the only real viable I was going to say the only real viable options were the Marauder that he's actually discarded and traded in for Ulfedin, so not too bad. Then, do you play the Skirmisher when you really want to discard it with Bran? Do you play the Longship?
Do you play the Count Caldwell? Because against Monsters, which is typically a deck that is scary, This is a great card. It's 10 points. You know, you think of this card, you say, wow, this is a great value. This man is huge. He's going to give me 10 full points for round 3, but he has a bit of a tooltip, we're reading it here, that can really punish you. It can be a 20-point swing in your opponent's favor instead, and this is, you know, a big monsters deck. It has very tall units. You have some tall units, but you're not going to win that battle, I think. So it's sometimes wise to play him here instead, have him with a Hyalmar synergy from the graveyard instead, and not kind of make an own lose condition for yourself.
Yep. I like it, especially against Woodland, where those 8 extra points onto something like the Spear Tip here makes a 20-point play, and that is a tall Ogroid, so, you know, not something that you really want Coldwell for. And yeah, I like it. It's 10 points, but it's 10 points that aren't necessarily great. And in terms of the mulligan, if you're looking for things like Coral or Sigurdriff's Rights, for example, it's going to be a bit tricky.
No one else dares.
There are 2 cards in the deck for Cologne that can deal with tall units. Hjalmar is one of them, of course. You can sacrifice one of these 2 very big units in the graveyard and do a lot of damage, plus a 3-point body as well in the melee row. Or Ulfodin, also in hand, gonna half the current power of these very tall units. So 2 options, not exactly Geralt of Rivia, for example, but still pretty strong options to deal with a very tall unit for monsters.
And some of you guys might be thinking, you know, what is Tailbot doing? He's playing all of his gold cards here. But Yuta, we talked about tall units, and she is a tall unit, potentially. So playing her out here, not too bad. But also she's a warrior, and Sigurdriff's Rights is used to resurrect from the graveyard. So having Yuta in graveyard, and like we said, developing that graveyard for things like Hjalmar, for things like Sigurdriff, is something that you have to do. So, you know, even though these cards do look like very high value cards that Cologne may be wasting, I think it's a case of losing the battle and winning the war.
Yeah, as we mentioned, the brand is a very interesting deck. A lot of things for a new player might seem odd. You're playing, you know, mulliganing gold cards in round 1, playing them in round 2. Like, what is this guy doing? Does he know how to play Gwent? But in this case, it's a bit of an interesting strategy. And because of the keyword difference between play and summon, it also means that Yuta gets the full value from Sigurdriff's Right. Doesn't get that -6 when she gets played. Or summoned, rather.
Yeah, but again, this mulligan is not looking so hot for Cologne. No Coral, 2 Spores, and a Skirmisher. I mean, you can discard 2 of those and try and improve your hand, but you want to have Coral. You don't want to find Coral after there she is, after you've discarded. You know, at that point, she's not quite so useful. And now he's discarded the spell. He may be able to find it again with Brenna Bran, but at that point, you know, this discarding the spell doesn't matter so much because I guess you could discard it with Bran, I suppose, the leader, but it's a little bit tricky.
You see, you can do very simple math here. If you're a King Bran player, you have 2 discards in hand, 2 discards in hand here, so that's 4 total, and 5, or the 5th one from Bran, and you have 5 cards in the deck. So again, the math checks out. You thin down to 0 and have full access to your entire deck to decide what cards are going to get the most value in this matchup specifically, and what cards you don't need. You can discard them, like Dimeridium Bomb, for example, without any artifacts in monsters.
Yep, so we will, I would imagine, see D-Bomb in the bin, Spores in the bin, Squaresix Skirmisher in the bin, but actually he can climb out of the bin. He's got legs, so he's not going out there. And then in terms of the deck here, lots of tasty draws and also Spores that you can throw in the bin.
Also for Tailbot, had a bit of a tricky mulligan as well. Had to get rid of one of the riders and make sure to keep a gold heart, at least 1 gold card in the deck, because he does have the Naglfar, like we said. If you're too lucky, and this card might be a brick, so you have to be a bit careful and don't get too lucky in these matchups.
I just hate it when I draw all of my good cards. It's the worst. So expected play here, again, we talked about Thrive units and getting those set up. Nekka's fairly commonly played, but with Harold can be utilized to damage your own units. You might be thinking, why am I going to damage myself? But we've got Harold's pal, and he's got 3 pals. He's a friendly fellow, so Death Wish damage a random enemy unit by 2, which means he can kill one of these and ping off one of those Nekka warriors should they spawn. So, you know, it might not be in his best interest to play these low value cards, but then at some point you're going to have to play them and try and find
the Fork Tail comes out, so Tailbot knows that he's going to be in trouble anyway whenever he plays a Fork Tail, so he plays it now. It's not a great trade, but this is a 7 provision card. It's a gold card for a bronze card, so it makes sense of the skulls get rid of. There's not going to be any damage from them, and also not going to be a horn synergy in that front row either. Although, in a very long round, you almost always expect them. You're going to get the full value from the horn anyway. You don't really need the skulls.
That sacrificial Forktail, he lived a good life, but I like it a lot also because of the Commander's Horn on this brand list. Those skulls sometimes utilized as a horn target, stacking up the row and making sure that you can get up to those 5 units and get the full value out of Commander's Horn. So removing them, you know, I think, you know, although the Forktail got sacrificed, a lot of points maybe have been denied in that sort of play.
You see 3 spells, 3 special cards in the hand or the deck for Cologne. He has to try and draw into that Spores. You're going to discard it with Coral with a leader. And you normally want to play Coral when you have the full value displayed already on your opponent's board. If it's a Thrive value, you can kill off and get even more points that you're reducing from later on, even better. So Tailbot has, or Killamon has to be a bit patient here. Has to wait to try and get that full value from Coral. I think if Neckers comes down, you just play Burn a Brand, get the guaranteed double ping, and that's a really easy way to also get untargeted damage, but not random damage on the Neckers.
Yeah, but then what do you discard? Because you don't necessarily want to be discarding those spells. You discard the Skirmisher, and then I guess you hope that what you draw into is something that you can discard, like the extra spores, for example.
Interesting, the Woodland Spirit comes out very early. The buff on the Wild Hunt Riders make sure that the tallest unit they can play themselves in a way. They have, counts themselves as well. So although we see all 5 here, there's a 12, and the Wild Hunt Rider is going to summon the second copy as well. We talked about it before. There's certain cards that are in every faction, but they each have synergy with different things. In this case, for monsters, the thinning cards, the thinning combo here is the highest unit.
But it also plays very comfortably into Hjalmar and Crate, because he can be utilized to banish a unit in your graveyard and damage an enemy by its power. We see 12 power here on the Wild Hunt Rider, but also 12 power in the graveyard on Yuta. So it's kind of tricky.
Well, it adds a buffer for damage. So if you want to play Neckers, the next card, for example, you have at least that 4, maybe that 12 could have been there as well, to block damage and make it more random, so the Neckers might survive. That's one way of doing it, and I think that's just the way that Tailbot thought would be the best way to do it.
But unfortunately, we did see the Hjalmar come along and chop that Wild Hunt Rider right down to size. His friend is no more. Harold is the only one who can have pals in this game, and not you, Wild Hunt Rider, so jog on.
Of course, once the Skulls dies for Harold, he kind of loses pretty much all its value. You can only damage your own units, so a bit of a suicidal man there in his later stage of life. Not making many friends, I think. Well, he has one friend at least. Not looking very cheerful, though, I'll promise that.
No, come on, cheer up, cheer up.
Little nudge.
But peeking back here on the board, Tailbot taking a lot of time, and this was the deck that he thought Colomone would struggle with, but at the moment, it really looks like Tailbot's starting to struggle a little bit. Like, yes, he does have big plays in terms of things like Ozril and the Ogroid friend there, or the Spear Tip, but is it going to be enough?
With Hjalmar out, he is giving Ulflin the chance to get some pretty good value again, pretty much optimal value. If the Spear Tip does die, then it gives Ozril more value as well. So like we said yesterday, a bit of a silver lining there if it gets killed eventually.
You are, however, losing value on these Thrives, and you do still have, like I say, the Ozril, so we've got another big unit there, and you can use that also to eat from your opponent's graveyard, so Count Caldwell being across there, he's going to be very comfortably full after such a meal. But it's tricky. It's really tricky in the sequencing, and I get what you're saying. He's trying to bait out those pings onto something bigger, but is it gonna be enough? And are you gonna get lucky, especially when things like Ulfiden then has a nice juicy target to chunk down to size?
Again, both players know each other's deck list, so they know exactly where the optimum value is going to reside. You see the 12-point unit, you see the Ulfiden. It just makes sense that it's played. There's no reason in waiting. Basically, you can save those Coral Pings and that more control-oriented cards like Burner Brand as well for later on.
It's tricky, and you gotta feel a little bit. We see the Imlerith's Curse coming out there and being utilized to chop down that boat. Not damage any of his units any further, just because that's going to make the pings less reliable. And I think in this situation, it's a fair play. Colomone's not expecting anything too tall out of this deck, so holding on to it till you play a larger unit on your side, not necessarily the best play.
And it could be a kind of a control strategy here from Tailbot, trying to reduce the amount of units in a single row to deny the Horn value. He has a lot of control in hand. Enrage Ifrit there, the Wyvern as well, the Crones.
Yeah.
So there's a chance he can possibly take away the optimal value away from the Horn, the 15 points.
And we see 2 pretty nice discard targets there, but actually 3 discard targets. So one of these cards not gonna be quite as useful at going in the mid. Morkvark, you definitely want to discard it. Well, it discards it and then it plays it. Similarly with the Skirmisher. But you then also see the Spores restore a unit to its base power. Not going to be quite so useful. So how do you pick?
Like we mentioned in this matchup, Spores is a card that on an Ozril gets a ton of value. So normally it's not the greatest card. It's only 4, 5, 6 points maybe in most matches. But in this matchup, for a bronze card that's cost 4 provisions to be worth 10, 11 points, all of a sudden you can keep it in hand instead of discarding it and use it for that points instead.
But alternatively, you do also have that discard on Bran. So usually when your hand gets a bit messy like that, you're like, that's okay, I'll throw someone else in the bin. It'll be fine.
And it also makes it you can play Coral and get the triple special card discard without having a chance for your opponent to answer back because of the Zeal effect on Coral. So Coral, definitely got a big buff. Some people even argue too big a buff. Definitely seeing a lot of play in Scaliolis at the moment. Adding consistency and also control damage onto your opponent's board is always going to be a very good thing.
I wonder how this Commander's Horn is going to turn out, though. Like you said, with all of this control, we also have the Naglfar there, giving you options for what to draw, and these are pretty big options. The Geralt, not so spicy, but you get to choose, so likely to see the Coldwell or the Weavis. And Weavises, Crones, they all work together and get more powerful, so those are big plays in and of itself, so that's pretty good. But 2 points on the Neckers at the moment, and 5 on the Wyvern's not too bad.
There's the suboptimal, so Grief was right, only 8 points, so a point under provision value, but again, you did use the Jetta with the Hjalmar instead, so it's fair. I think 8 points is still pretty decent as kind of a nice tempo play, and an extra body on that front row as well. In this case, with the Morkvarg also going to the front row, melee row, there's still a lot of kind of unit plays left in Colomon's hand, so I think he's not too worried about getting the horn value. 2 cards left in hand, 2 discards left. Morkvarg will definitely be one of them. The second one could be a Spores.
Yeah,
even though it's a lot of value, you have only gold cards left in hand. And the Neckers finally come out. This is very rare. 5 turns from the end, seeing a Necker come down, but in this matchup, it's sometimes necessary.
Yeah, just kind of unfortunate in the fact that the Thrive units could get pinged down so easily that forcing him to commit cards. But we see Burner coming out now, the Commander's Horn in hand, Morkvarg and Spores in the bin.
Boom, boom. Okay, so 1 Necker killed, still pretty good value.
Yeah. 30 to 8.
Tilbot did his best to save those Neckers, but could not do enough. One of them does end up dying.
And I think this is where you got to... Well, you ping off a unit and it's not enough, though. You still got the full value on the Commander's Horn, so... Is this going to be the Bran win on the first try?
I think it's too many points. You have the Enraged Ifrit to counter the synergy between Kyrenex and the Unicorn, but still, the Horn comes down for 15. There's already a huge point gap. A lot of the finishes that you normally expect from monsters to catch up have already been used earlier on, and the Thrive unit gets killed here as well. I assume Enraged Ifrit will come down here.
Yeah, Osril is nice, but Osril is not that big. Similarly, with the Naglfar, you're getting maybe Coldwell, you're getting the Brewis, but considering the point difference at this stage, plus the 15-point Commander's Horn and the 8-point Unicorn on the side of Colomon, it's looking like it's going to be 2-0 at this point. Yeah,
there are 2 great gold cards left for Tilbot, but some of his big units like Spirit Tip have been played. His leader has been played, something you normally expect at the very end, those crazy 20-point swings with Woodland Spirit. Already played, and maybe Colomon showing why King Bran has been banned so many times this weekend.
And I think this maybe comes down a little bit to that sequencing. If Telbot expected Queen Meve here, he thought maybe he could, find the Monsters win against in that matchup. And if that happens, then you don't need to find that Monsters win versus Bran. So interesting, the sequencing and how this may have affected the outcome of these players. And this is one of the things, like we said, it's one of those strategies that you don't necessarily think about as a player, because when you're queuing, you don't know what you're going to be against in terms of the ladder. But at tournaments can be very, very impactful.
Again, Tilbot has the Geralt of Rivia in his deck, not currently in the hand. Could have been good onto a few of these units in the front row, especially if they get buffed with the Horn. You kind of can't dodge that buff on the Veteran, for example. You can get to 12 points or to 11 points the next turn with Lassay, but in this case, Tilbot doesn't have it, and even if he did have it, this is an enormous point gap.
Yeah, may not find it here, and even if he does, I don't believe it is enough points for him, and yeah.
Not really hiding information because the players have each other's deck list, but still no point in playing there either. Too big a point gap for Naglfar to find any answer in the deck for Tilbot. And it's going to be a 2-0 lead for Colomon already in this series. Yeah. So a pretty strong opening for him. Tilbot losing his red coin matchup.
Yeah, and the thing is, the players joke. They make this joke, Colomon doesn't misplay. And, we talk about tournament plays. We talk about, where could I improve? How could I improve? And people say, everyone misplays except for Colomon. Like, he is clinical in the way that he plays these decks, and there's a reason that he's won an Open before. There's a reason why a lot of people actually regard him as the best player maybe in the world for Gwent, not just top 20 in Germany. So we'll see. Queen Meve, it's up to her now, and Tilbot, he's got quite a hill to climb.
When you're 0-2 down, it's always hard to come back into a series, win 3 games in a row against normally quite a good player in semifinals, but in this case, a top 20 player in Germany as well, Colomon. So Tilbot, definitely a steep hill to climb.
And we've seen it happen before, though.
We've seen it happen. It's
Reverse
always exciting
sweeps.
to see because it seems so improbable, and then it ends up happening anyway. Definitely a testament to the fortitude of some of the players in their mental state to not get nervous, not feel too much pressure, instead just focus on playing Gwent, on taking a game at a time and clawing back into the series. But we could also just see a 3-0 sweep from Cologne, which would be, I think, anticlimactic and very surprising as well.
Yeah, and then these players, whoever does win, will go on to fight off against Wanged One in the finals. Either way, with the outcome of this match, both of these players qualifying for the upcoming challenger. If you make it to the finals of the Open, you qualify for a challenger. So whoever wins that way will qualify. The other players, both of them, doing pretty well in terms of crown points. So if they don't qualify through the Open, they can qualify through crown points. And so although, the final is exciting, they don't have to worry so much about that challenger qualification. Whereas Wanged, he's guaranteed his spot at challenger, and that was something that obviously wasn't certain. So, lots of different things at stake, including prize money, because there is a split.
And for all the pro players watching at home, you have your chance to climb the pro ladder this season and next season and find yourself playing in the qualifier for the next challenger event as well. 2 qualifiers are going to be held for the challenger event that might be coming, I'd guess around May, nothing confirmed yet, still in process of setting that up, but another great tournament with an even bigger prize pool, 4 times bigger than this Open, so even more at stake and probably even better players and skill displayed.
And here comes Henselt once again. Henselt versus Queen Meave, the battle of the realms. It's gonna be tough for Tilbot. Do you think Colomon gets in his head?
He has to, right? I mean, you see a player that's very calm, he's 2-0 up, he's known as a very dominant player. It's going to be really hard for him to come back. And I think both of these decks, they're both Northern Realm, they have very similar cards. Some of the cards are very similar, but kind of different game plans and different, especially the leader kind of gives it away as well, that they're very different decks. Meave is more like kind of the Garen Nakora deck, where you get the value of the leader distributed over 3 rounds, much more evenly, much more, you can fight for every round, whereas Henselt, more like Will and Spirit, kind of this bursty play that you can play at any point and get that instant amount of points that you need at a certain situation.
That is true. We do talk about different combos, though, and the Trebuchet Lacerate combo in the hand of Colomoan, but not in the hand of Henselt. Maybe impactful at this stage, maybe not. It does depend how this round turns out. Does Tailbot want to win this round 1? He tried last time, it didn't work out. Is he going to just give it up? I don't know. And
this shows the players knowing the matchup very well. We saw the Lyrian Arbalist not buffed against Nilfgaard because Leo Bonhart is an option that kills off a unit that's 8 points or higher, and also would kill off an engine, so that's even more value you're taking away from the future rounds in a long round 1. Whereas in this case, not really a great immediate response to an 8-point unit. There's no Geralt of Rivia in the deck for Colomoan, for example, so he has a chance to buff that unit and keep it a bit more safe.
Yep, we see the Tridem infantry here on the side of Queen Meave, buffing it up by 1 point, and every time it's boosted, it deals damage. So that boost actually seeing a little bit of extra damage. And, this card is an interesting one. Occasionally, it can be a problem with things like Anna of Streger, because she boosts units next to it, and then you create this kind of chain reaction. So sometimes it's a problem, but not necessarily a huge one. It depends how, I was going to say, Talbot feels about this, and clearly he felt like it deserved to go in the bid.
And here a very obvious play, pretty much just a 1+1 is 2 play there. You see the instant damage here, 3 onto the unit there for Colomoan, and then just a ping from the Arbalist to kill it off as well, kill that engine off, and get that engine advantage right now if you are Tailbot.
Yep, and this is going to see whose train is bigger as we chew along the tracks. Although, like we said, it depends how much players value this first round, how much they value last say, and how much they value control as to whether they play fairly heavily here. Vesemir going down there. Enough tomfoolery, let's get the rest of the Witchers on the board, get the deck thin, so opting, not to play an engine, and we may very well see the Witchers answer Witchers here, as they are both in both players' hands, thinning and helping you to set up your draws going forward.
And again, this, the plays also just give a lot of insight into what the players are thinking in terms of their game plan. You're playing the Witchers for consistency and for thinning, instead of playing something like an engine earlier on. You already lost a point on Boschling, for example, for not playing it the turn before, so it might, say that Colomon is not looking to have full control of this round 1 to take it, to the very end, whereas Tailbot, the complete opposite. He's playing his engines early, he's playing lower value points the moment you play them, but they can start ramping up into a lot more points as the round goes on.
For sure. So a second Lyrian Obelisk there on the other side of the downed Sorceress. Not an overly committal play in terms of this round, but does get a second, engine on the board. These engines are, not all engines are created equal, I say. These ones require you to play units with orders to boost them up, whereas something like a botchling is triggering every turn. So, not necessarily the most valuable, and this really doesn't tell Colomon whether Talbot wants to commit to this round or not. But in terms of the Colomon's plays, he doesn't seem to be committing too much either.
This is Colomon taunting Talbot, making sure to set up a nice Igni with 4s in the front row because he knows that Talbot is not running it. But again here, the boost's not too consequential. There isn't something like an Anna Stranger in hand, for example, or Infantryman, for example, that was already killed. So no real need for boosts, no synergies in hand at the moment. Unless you want to kind of keep an engine maybe safer or Selker.
That's true. Ronvid the Incessant. You could be Incessant, Pandy, comes out here on the board, boosts himself, and then whenever we see a soldier, he's going to get a little bit more powerful. Oh, no, sorry, that's a lie. Whenever you play a soldier, he's going to come out of the graveyard. So just playing him here and then setting him up to be the Incessant Ronvid that he is in future rounds. He's an interesting card. Also a human, though, and that's what's important here, is if you can keep bringing him back when you find your Draug, he's no longer going to be Ronvid the Incessant. He's going to be Ronvid the Cadweni Knight.
That's the main reason. That's the main reason he's played. Really, I think he has the human tag because the value is fine for the provisions. But if you're not seeing a certain card in most NR decks, and you do see it in a particular one, you have to start looking at why this could be. What's the reason? What's the synergy that gives it the extra value in this matchup or in this deck specifically? And it is that human tag that works so well with the Revenants and with the Draug that is in the deck for Talbot.
I agree. I think that is a fair point. And again, we still haven't really seen commitment to this round, not even committing the Witchers, although we have gone past that 7-card mark. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I really do feel like I was going to say Talbot's trying to bait Colomon into committing, and Colomon's not having any of it.
Yeah, and there's what we talked about, the game plan being, spelled out by both players. Colomon not playing for full optimal value with his engines, instead playing some thinning, playing some bad bronzes instead, and Talbot doing a bit of the opposite, preparing to fight to the very end of this round 1 to have control over round 3 and the length of both of these next 2 rounds.
And Talbot's hand, pretty powerful. I was going to say, what do you necessarily mulligan here? Because you don't have that Draug, which is something that you want to see, opting to mulligan and finding a Witcher. So that, again, straight in the bin. And the hand seems about the same as when he started mulliganing.
We'll see what Talbot's strategy is here. Both, again, because the factions are basically mirrored, the decks and the archetypes aren't exactly mirrored, but there's still a lot of engines in Northern Realms. That's kind of the word you associate with the faction. So a long round is going to be scary for both players, I think.
Yeah, though I think a long round slightly scarier for Colomon because, Hensel as a leader does give you a little bit more of a power play in a shorter round if you hold on to it. And also if you don't draw into your target. So Meve, on the other hand, she's good, she gives you value, but she gives you value every round. Whereas she doesn't have that big burst of value in maybe the one round that you need it.
There's the buff onto the Commando. Makes it a little bit more resilient. 5 points is a little bit hard to reach. 4 points, quite easy in the meta.
Vez takes it right out of Vez range. So Vez sitting here and she likes to deal 4 damage to a unit. But Meve, that's where she kind of shines, is denying these removals. Because this Blue Stripe Scout, although he doesn't look like much, he can summon his buddies out of the deck and say, hey, come over here, there's a party going on. That's a lie, there's a war, but still. Meanwhile, Blue Stripe Scout, they're both Blue Stripe friends. And she's like, oh, look, you got buddies, I got one too. Adds another Blue Stripe Commando to the deck, and suddenly this isn't summoning one buddy, he's got 2 friends.
Of course, a lock can be played as well with Margarita, but there's so much to lock, you have to kind of decide what is the scariest thing for me to deal with. Is it this Commando that can add a lot of burst tempo right away and kind of stop my bleed in its tracks? Or is it a long round engine like the Botchling, like the Ogfist, for example, that can really damage me in the long round 3? Talbot says, this is scary enough, let's get rid of this right now, just lock it.
Yeah, I think this is a really fair play. Not only are you locking that Commando, but you're making the other Commando less lucrative. That Commando now is potentially, well, it is a bad draw unless you can play it in synergy with the Scout. But also, the Scout in hand now is bad because the Scout in hand doesn't have, the bestest of targets. You can spawn another one of these, but you're not going to be able to thin them. So you're actually basically, I guess, worsening your draws, although I do believe it goes at the bottom of the deck. Yeah,
it's hard to value exactly how many points you kind of take away from your opponent by doing this. It's more of an abstract thing with the consistency and the mulligans and the draws and a bit harder math than just 1 + 1 is 2. But still, it is definitely valuable, like you said, to break your opponent and make him have to force these mulligans onto certain cards and maybe not the ones he draws instead.
And Tailbot just deciding how long he wants to play this one out. Colomon really not committed anything in terms of cards. Opting to now play that Selkirk, and that's a costly play. But, you know, Selkirk, he's only as strong as his point value, right? Selkirk, he duels an enemy, and what that means is he'll fight them. So the stronger he is, the more damage he can inflict. So the more you damage him, the weaker he is. But you can counteract that with something like a boost. Say the Unicorn, make Selkirk even stronger before he starts punching Tailbot's units in the face.
Or something like Vincent to take it down to 1 and have to force the Unicorn instead. So, like we said, Draug is the kind of win condition and the synergy and the archetype here for Hensel, but in the case of Meve, it is a boost strategy with Anastrenga, with the Trident Infantryman, with the Unicorn, the Selkirk. So you can probably rely on the boost from Meve and also the boost from certain cards in hand as well.
Yeah, so I think that Selkirk is pretty threatening, but it is a commitment to this round, and these are the kind of things that Tailbot wants. He wants Colomon to start spending some of these more valuable cards whilst being maintaining a lead. He needs to maintain this lead so that he doesn't go into the final round a card down, and yeah, I like it.
So Selkirk a bit scary, even if you could take it down to 1 with the Vest, for example, or the Vincent Mace, it's still, Unicorn isn't an order effect. It's an instant effect, it's a deploy effect, and it'll buff it up immediately and get that duel from Selkirk. So you can eventually lose your card and go a card down into round 3, and Tailbot does not want that at all.
Yep. This 7-card spot also actually the sweet spot for that long round 3, and both of these decks like a long round, but especially if you can find Draug and set up a lot of humans, that's where it starts to, there you go.
Well, the Draug is there. The thinning has helped out. Tailbot only 5, or maybe a few more cards with the mulligans being blacklisted on the side. Left in the deck, 6 cards there, we see it.
And there's Geralt.
Tailbot all done with his mulligans, and Colomon looking at his deck, looking what
it's not so spicy.
Well, you have the Commando, which you maybe don't want.
I mean, you have one more Commando because he did play that Blue Stripe Scout, I believe, in the second round. So it does potentially represent 8 points of value, but again, it's something that is deniable. However, there are more important denial targets, I think, in this deck. Things like Anastrenga, you don't want her to start boosting all of her friends. Similarly, Orkfist can be brutal in a 10-card round, depending on the state of your board. So it depends on what you value more. On the flip side, though, these Draug Revenants, I think, are going to be pretty overwhelming.
Well, they're great, but they have kind of this multiply effect. And when you're looking at last rate, that damages all the units in a row, sometimes you think, you know, you're playing Orkfist, your last rate, is my opponent going to have enough units? You want to go for the longer round to have the most units possible, but Revenants make that very easy. They just multiply like crazy, and you have the guaranteed value, or pretty much guaranteed full value on last rate and on Orkfist, for example, so it's not as tricky. But, you know, that last rate does make all of those Revenants 1, which means they can kind of start shooting their friends, and depending on when that play happens, that could be something that is counteracted just by their multiplicity. Although I reckon if you're going to go for a last rate, you go for it last, where that no longer becomes a problem. We see some botchling on botchling action here. If the botchling is played from Tailbot, of course, there isn't really, it's not easy to take down the botchling. You'd have to lock it or kill it in one blow, because it has that flip effect where if you want to flip it, it'll go to its other form and get the full health, you know, the 5 health once again. So you either kill it, you lock it, or you deal with it for a 10-card round, which is, you know, a pretty big, you know, 15-point play. That's a little bit scary.
Yeah, the botchling, though, it does have the boost there, so if it gets transformed at the moment, you actually lose those boosts. So Meve being utilized there to boost up the botchling, but if there's ever a situation where you want to transform it, that boost is lost, although usually that's after it's taking damage.
There is Romvid making an appearance, a bit of a, you know, no one called him, but he came anyway. Shows up out of nowhere, limping, so maybe not as strong as he once was.
No, not quite as strong, but he is a human, and that does play into that Draug strategy. You can also opt, if you're playing your Revenants from hand, to ping him off and kill him, because he is incessant. Like, he's coming back whenever you play a soldier. So you can send him to the graveyard, play another soldier, and then bring him back in order to then transform him as part of the Draug army.
Spinning, he comes back at 1 strength as well, because this does not look like someone I would be scared of. I mean,
you should be.
That's a very strong
Do you have
limp.
no respect for Lady Bilberry's honor?
Not at all, Jagras. Absolutely zero.
But you
respect.
want some botchling on botchling action. Is that the kind of man that you are, Panda?
I mean, I don't want to, you know, leak too much, but it could be, that could be the secret, Jagras.
Fair enough, fair enough. So both players just taking their time and really figuring out this matchup, figuring out what it is they want to play and when it is they want to play it. No one's really committed too much, and botchling is one of those engines that it's lovely to lock, but it's not as problematic as some of these other options. So, you know, letting it slide. Oh, there he goes, he's transformed. He's a lubber.
Let's keep that unicorn a tiny bit healthier. Going to keep it safe from Vest, for example, and you have the unicorn in hand as well. So you lost a point on the transformation. You gained a point on the resilience of this unicorn surviving, and or this Chiron surviving, and you have a chance to, like we said, 4 is kind of the magical number in terms of removal. 2 and 4. 3 is a little bit harder to come by, but still exists, and 5 is quite rare from a single card.
But if you're not Colamon, if you're Tailbot, are you worried that much about the extra boost with the Chiron Unicorn synergy when you're sitting with Geralt of Rivia in hand, ready to lop off some heads with one blow?
Well, you probably find value anyway with the Anna Strenger, for example, when it starts boosting the units next to it. So it's you probably get that Geralt getting value anyway in this round. But like you said, that is very true. It does help the sequencing maybe for Tailbot to be able to play this earlier on and free up his later plays.
Yep, so Botchling there coming down now. You can't transform the Botchling the turn that it's played, and seeing it deal damage there onto the Lubberkin typically just encourages him to turn back into a Botchling, and maybe you'll get that action you were after all, Panda.
Unlucky ping there. Could have pinged the unicorn down to 4.
Yep, hits the highest unit, and if both of them are on 5, then it kind of comes down a little bit to chance, and the chance wasn't, in this case, in the Tailbot's favor. What do you commit here? It's tricky. You've got the boost, so you could go for Strenger, but you only have the one boost because it's the pocket boost from Meve. It's tough. But, I mean, she'd get boosted by the Lubberkin. She'd be the smallest unit, and Lubberkin, he boosts the smallest allies. So, does he boost himself? I don't believe he does, which means that he would also pop a boost on Strenger. But if you then boost it with Meve, that's not going to happen. So then, again, we're talking about chance, and then you've got 2 5s, and I don't know. It's hard to say.
I think Strenger was the option. Everything else just doesn't make too much sense. Maybe the Commando could have been played as well to bait out a lock or a removal, but again, this is an engine that you get 2 points per turn, which is more than the usual engine. Normally it's 1 point per turn. It's a bit riskier because it can get just a little point of damage, or 2 could make it useless basically, unless it doesn't even have to be killed, for example. But still, if it's left unchecked, 2 points every turn for 8 or 7 turns is a lot of points for the provision it costs.
Yep, that is some super high value, but Strenger, she's only boosting when she's boosted, It's like boostception, so she's not actually as difficult to counter as you maybe think, because, he can just damage that. Even 1 point of damage will be enough to bring her out of that boost range and stop the action. However, if you have options like Meve or like Unicorn to boost her back up, it's kind of a tricky one. And ideally, you want to kill her, but there aren't really options or immediate options on the side of Tailbot. The only, easy option is the Selkirk, but that takes a turn. Vest brings her down, but doesn't take her out.
It does set up the Revenants to have a little target there to kill, but I think we could just see a Unicorn come down now. Maybe buff it up a whole lot, up to 9, but then Geralt can come down and counter it and kill it, and that will definitely seal the deal on her fate for this round 3.
For sure, and that's a totally valid line of play. But by the same vein, how do you feel about this Vest? Because although you want to protect your Strenger, you also have Vest giving Zeal to a unit. And if you give Zeal to something like, say, a Selkirk, that means he can immediately start dueling things and immediately take something off the board, which will answer one of your engines. So this sequencing thing is very kind of, where do you put your opponent? What do you expect them to have? And I think with both players, it's difficult to call. But if you leave a 1-strength body on the board, that's when I think you start seeing these Revenants come down. Because you've got that Hensel, you can pull one out that has Zeal and immediately take away that Strenger, dealing with a problem and spawning yourself a friend. But we talked about the Unicorn play. There it is.
So the placement has so much layers as well. You want to play front row to dodge the Reinforced Trebuchet. Both players have it in hand. But you also want to play back row, if you're Tailbot, to have the Revenants in the front row with only 2 reach, to have full access to the entire board, and to have an empty row to multiply in. Then you also have Lacerate to punish that, so multiple layers of what you're playing into, what you're playing around, what you're playing against. So it's definitely difficult. Both of these players have played this matchup, I assume, multiple times, have practiced it over the course of last night, once they found out who their opponent was going to be for the semifinals.
I would imagine, though, we will see the Geralt come down Strenger. She's just a little bit too strong. You should call her Anna Stronger at this point. 9 points, though, can easily be killed, but Selkirk with the Vest. Stand and fight, cowards. And opting to kill the Botchling, so not, maybe worrying about those 2 points per turn quite as much. I guess you can take it out the next turn. Mm-hmm. And if you're worried that your Vest is going to get killed, then utilizing that Botchling removal right now, I don't think he botched that job.
Giving 2 extra points of value to Colamon with the engine that he has on board with the Anna Strenger. Although I think you said stronger, I think stranger is probably the better adjective. I mean, Her
Pretty
hand
strange.
is burning through. There's a sunspot on it. I'm not gonna, even know what kind of medical condition that is, but definitely a strange one. I have not seen that in real life yet.
You're making puns, Panda. Just call you Panda.
I'm making one pun per weekend. I think that's a nice limit to have as a nice, serious caster like I am, of course.
Right.
No memes here. Definitely don't look at Freddy Babe's chat at any time.
Fair enough. And so it's now up to Coleman in terms of how he wants to respond to this. With the thing is with these trebuchets in both cases, they're not that useful, right? You like to play them with something on the back row, but there's nothing on the back row, so they're kind of representing 4-point plays, but 4-point plays in both players' hand. The Blue Stripe Commando is there on the board, and again, trying to maybe force Tailbot to make a choice in terms of what he chooses to deal with. However, he doesn't actually have a way to deal with this Blue Stripe Commando, so I think Strenga is worth taking out. Also, because she keeps boosting everyone, which is bad if you have Vincent, because he can only set the power of a non-boosted enemy to 1. So with all these points across the board, Vincent could become a problem.
Yeah, Miva's inherently very strong against just counterplaying Vincent Maze, and also, for example, Kraken Prey with Bloodthirst. You just boosts everything, so there is nothing to, you don't have the damage mechanic and the Bloodthirst mechanic going for you. But NS Stranger does get removed. A 2-point per turn engine is very strong. You want to get rid of it sooner rather than later, but that frees up the Commando to survive, to get, his homies in that front row as well.
And I think now that the round has gone on a little bit, Tailbot is not quite so worried about that trebuchet. We saw this happen in the previous game with the trebuchet play with the last rate, playing into the front row until you're about 4 or 5 cards into the front row, and then you start playing into the back row, because at that point the round starts to be short enough that the trebuchet is not such a problem. But also, Coleman playing his trebuchet then allows for the reinforced trebuchet of Tailbot to have a target. However, Coleman's one is going to have to take a chance on what it hits. So potentially this trebuchet, not all created equal. We saw that other one just falling apart last time. This might be the reinforced trebuchet that we need.
We could see trebuchet on trebuchet action. An immovable object and an unstoppable force meeting on the battlegrounds. What will happen? Probably both will die eventually, but that's not as exciting. So I'll leave it to the viewers to find out in 4 turns maybe, or less.
The other thing with this trebuchet that's kind of interesting is it's maybe a little bit counterproductive for Coleman, because we talk about those 1-point units and reach, right? And the thing is, K20 Revenants, they are indiscriminate with their massacre. So if this Geralt goes down to 1, he's suddenly a pretty spicy target for becoming part of the Revenant army. Witcher School, pretty nice, but not nice enough. Although Lubberkin boosting the smallest unit brings him back up to 3. So we'll see if that's something that maybe becomes a threat. And we may see this Lubberkin transformed if it's something that Tailbot's considering.
The Octvis still in hand. Gonna be a scary one to deal with if you're Tailbot. Gonna have a lot of units in a few more turns as well.
It's an interesting one. The Octvis, though, if you can set up your Revenants, is not such a problem if you play them before the Octvis, because you can then use Vincent to bring the Octvis down to 1 and ping it right down with a Revenant and find a friendo. So sequencing is so important in this matchup, and both players really taking their time to kind of consider their options. And we found out which trebuchet was equal. It turns out trebuchet on trebuchet action maybe not appropriate for the stream.
But in Rage Ifrit, though, no eyes, but still perfect aim. So
I think
it'd be really good hearing, possibly.
I'd be pretty enraged if I had
Could
no
be a
eyes.
very long ear, maybe. Has sensors on the back of it. Definitely alien life form, though, not anything you see on Earth, thankfully.
Yeah, you're not so keen on all of these Witcher characters. But the other thing with the Kidwenny is you pull out a second one, but Vest can kill one. So again, it's like, how do you sequence this? Do you play Shayla and then wait for the Vest, then play the Revenants in order to answer the Octfist?
That's the thing. The earlier you play them, the more value you can get. So the greediness is there, but if you wait, you can play around more things. Wait for your opponent to use cards like Vest, cards that can control locks, even when we saw against Nilfgaard, for example, and it makes it so that you have the guarantee for some value. Not the maximum, but at least some of it.
And we see the Lubberkin once again. He's not sure if he's a botchling or a Lubberkin, so we'll just see him turn back into the creepy mole. And the thing with this deck, though, you need humans, right? And we've currently got the 4 humans here on the front row for Draug, but this Shayla can instantly be removed by the Vest, which I imagine we'll see here. Yep, there you go. So that's denied not only the human transformation, but also her order with the 2 damage. But again, we talked about Geralt of Rivia's now 1 point, Kidwenny Revenants. What do you think?
That being said, Vest gives that little bit of order, the Zeal ability to Octopus when it comes down.
Yep.
Can kill a Geralt, for example. Put it, out of its misery at 1 strength in that back row. But then you have, there's a big point gap right now between both players. But Tailbot is a card up. He has his kind of bursty leader that's going to get a pretty big Revenant out of the deck as well. And he has his win condition. This is what this deck is made for, and it's all about this. When you play Ronvid as a human, you play all these different humans. You're only looking to play Draug as a finisher at the end and try and get full value from him. So the question is, will it be enough? Vincent, like you mentioned, has some targets right now.
And that Octfist, it may be a little bit counterintuitive, same with the last rate, because you bring those units down to that 2-point mark, then, or that 1-point mark, suddenly they become Kidwenny fodder. And actually, Draug's coming out now, that we will not give up.
Octfist could come down for sure right now. They have the guaranteed value. If you don't do it now, you can see a Vincent ping down that Vest the next turn anyway, and you just won't have the Zeal effect, or it would be way too risky to just rely on that Vest surviving against a faction like NR that has a lot of damage effects with most of its engines. So, and the Revenant's already there basically.
Yeah, we see Vincent here, 2 points. So he's again something that you could target yourself, but you do need to play him in the melee row, so you can't then rely on the Trebuchet to do the damage for you. And it's hard to call at this point. 29 points to 23. But 3 Revenants on the board and no answers for all 3 of those in the hand of Colomoan, so it's tough.
Last rate will be a solid amount of points. Vincent obviously forced to play into the front row.
But you have to play Octfist now if you want to get those points, because like you said, Vest can just get pinged straight down, and you're investing in removal rather than in spawning friends, but that removal could be pretty powerful. We actually see the Octfist being played, and I would imagine, the rope!
So the Vest isn't... The Zeal isn't given to the Octfist, instead trying to find maximum value on more units. Vincent can't kill the Octfist, but he can kill...
No, but you can ping the Octfist once, bring it down to 5, utilize the Vincent, bring it down to 1, and then kill the Octfist.
Yep.
That's
true, and that would be
strategy.
a whole lot of points taken away. Of course, Vest's ability, she can't really give Zeal to Lacerate. That doesn't make too much sense in my universe anyway. And that means that, we saw it yesterday as well, the Vincent was played in the Ada Legion playing Ada, I believe, against Green Knight. He kept the Vincent ability to use his damage later on. He made a risky play to try and see if he could get value from that maximum value. Instead, lost all of it instead. And the same happened here.
And we see the Octfist is no more, but that front row is getting more and more stacked. And that's something that plays very comfortably into last rate. Though, the last rate is going to make all those 3s down to 2s, and we may start to see the Revenants not be quite so friendly with their pals after all.
This will be quite the culmination to this game. We talked about botching on botching action, Trebuchet on Trebuchet action, but now the ultimate sacrifice, Revenant on Revenant action. They will be killing each other to multiply. You can kill the Trebuchet in the back row, it's at 2, so it's quite close. You have a Zeal effect on the Henselt as well. Yep.
So you've got 2 more Revenants in pocket, but only one of those is going to trigger damage. So ultimately, you have up to 3 Revenants here, and in terms of how you want to play them, and that one does get boosted as well. Remember, so I think this is going to be Tailbots. Those Revenants, there's just too many. Yep, way too many Revenants, and maybe not even some Revenant. Oh, never mind, Revenant on Revenant action is still happening.
Tailbot knows. He's a man of culture. He knows what's up. And there's going to be Tailbot taking it at the very end there with his win condition, finally be able to see kind of the full value you can get from Henselt, Draug, and the Revenant interaction with the humans, and able to claw back into the series, take this game from Colomoan in the 3rd game, and now he's going to be back on red coin, which is definitely a good thing for Tailbot. Has a bit of a better chance, and Meave still has to pick up a win for Colomoan.
Definitely an action-packed matchup, and it may turn out that Bran wasn't the downfall of Colomoan after all. It may be that Meave is not quite enough. We'll have to see how this works out. And in terms of your sequencing now, your Tailbot, your options are your Morvran or your Woodland, and you're on red. So which of these decks do you prefer going first? Which of these decks do you prefer going second? Monsters, it does like to have that finisher, that big final play. But if you're not worried about removal in terms of the Meave list, then, not necessarily worried about that. Whereas Morvran, it's the Nilfgaard list. And we've talked about Nilfgaard being a little bit tricky. And, if you're playing a tricky deck, sometimes you like to have, like I said, that reactive nature, which I think a lot of the time Nilfgaard can be.
Woodland Spirit is a deck you want to have the kind of last say most of the time in round 3. That's important to consider as well. Whereas Morvran doesn't really have that crazy finish that can get very punished. It doesn't have that huge unit. This is more of a pretty mid-range list. Actually, the Nilfgaard as a faction in general is quite mid-range. I think it has points evenly distributed, not anything too crazy. I guess Horn is kind of the option that most people play into with Menno, for example, and a Sire. But in this case, more of a control-y list.
It's gonna be intriguing to see exactly how Talbot chooses to go forward. Of course, Colomon, he's one with 2 lists. He ain't got any choice. It's gonna be Queen Meve, whether he likes it or not. And Meve up against Woodland, that Woodland on the red coin, guaranteeing that last say and trying to make sure that those points stick, because we didn't see them stick last time this deck was played.
When we get the matchup, NR is the engines are very weak, but if they survive, they can get you a lot of points over a long round. And for the most part, Monsters isn't considered a deck that has too much control options. It's more of a solitaire, point slam. You have the Thrive effect that doesn't really interact with your opponent at all. And it's more the faction that gets controlled instead of the one that controls.
But if you look at the Woodland list on the side of Talbot, we see things like Enraged Ifrit, we see things like Imlerith's Wrath, we have the Wispus from the Crone, so also an option for dealing damage. In a long round, you have something like a Forktail. Even for a little bit of ping damage, you have the Wild Hunt Hound. So there is a lot more control in this Woodland list than you would typically see in a Monsters list.
And that's clearly a tournament tech from Talbot. He says, on ladder, normally I wouldn't play this kind of deck because I don't really need so much control. I can rely more on just the points and just the burst potential from Woodland Spirit. But in this case, you want to have kind of all your bases covered. You say you don't want this to be an auto-lose against Meve, which in this case, you have to play. You have to beat this Meve list with Woodland Spirit, so you have to do this. And like you said, a lot of different options. Forktail, it's great at taking away that 1 point of boost that some units might have that do enough to keep it rolling, getting that value point from the engines, like Anna Strenger. In this case, the Forktail can, like you said, do quite a lot in a long round.
The other thing I think worth noting, just while we're here, is the Drowner. Drowner typically used as a Thrive unit, but also does have that movement, and that movement can be core against row-locked units. For example, Selkirk, he has duel, but only if he's on the front row. And we may potentially see this Drowner utilized instead of as Thrive, as a counter, depending on if there's certain units that you'd expect on rows, such as the Trebuchet. So that could be something that usually you would see played in this whole kind of Thrive, 1, then 2, then 3 strategy, but not necessarily the strategy that we're going to see here.
Whenever I play Northern Realms on ladder and I queue into Monsters and my Selkirk is immobilized by this very large-headed demon, I just ask myself, just a ton of questions, like, why is this happening? Why is this my life? Should I mulligan Selkirk instead of actually playing it, even though he's a gold card? Very confusing questions to have when you're playing Gwent, but it happens.
It's a tricky one, but it also means that Talbot doesn't have to be quite so worried about the Lacerate if you have the Drowners as an option for those Trebuchets, and something that I think we may see him do, although opting here to utilize the Wild Hunt Riders and start to thin his deck out, playing these, if it's the largest unit on your side, including itself, then it thins its friend. But we see a synergy here. Kidweni Sergeant boosts an ally by 1, Tridem Infantry every time he gets a boost, and he's getting a lot of boosts. It's a big workout at the gym.
We talked about it. Monsters doesn't have that much control. You have 2 damage pings from the Wyvern, from the Drowner, but you cannot be killing this infantryman right now. So almost right away, these 2 bronzes are played from Colombo inside. They're bronzes, but they can maybe just win the round immediately for Colombo because you can't really deal with them, easily if you're Talbot. But
you may feel more comfortable, as you see here, with playing those Neckers, because now that the ping is off of Queen Meve and you've seen the Tridem, for 1, there are 4 units here, so the chances of him hitting your Neckers are lower, but for 2, that Meve boost isn't currently available, so they have a chance to try and grow a little bit, get a little bit bigger, water them a little bit, and maybe show them some sunshine, and hopefully they'll survive.
But as a third point, there are, the chance of playing 2 bronzes instead of the gold card. You have that restriction with only 1 gold card. You can't get a copy of it, obviously, for the most part, but with bronzes you can play 2, so a second one can come down and boost that infantryman once again, and maybe get a tiny bit lucky and get those damage pings onto the Neckers and block a lot of future value in this round 1.
And we do see that play coming out here. Where's it going to go? Oh, that's the worst target, because not only does it, is it not a Necker, it's not a 1-point Wild Hunt Rider. Oh, so lucky Talbot.
The meat shield, the president's bodyguard, taking all the bullets. I mean, if the Neckers are my president, then I'd be very worried. They have kind of a big brain, right?
And the Neckers, they live to neck another day. I guess that's what or scratch their butts, depending on how you're feeling.
Not the best image for a president, but we'll just let it happen. You have your chance, Neckers. Don't waste it.
And
make Gwent great again.
Make Nilfgaard great again. Telebot deciding on what he wants to do here. Still plenty of Thrive units in hand. We see Drowners, we see Wyverns, we see Neca Warriors. But again, I think that Drowner is a little bit of a pocket strat, and we may see him circumvented in favor of the 3-strength Wyvern here, utilized to deal a little bit of damage. But do you want to save that damage? You know, would you play the 4 here instead, just because you maybe want to save that damage to deny Stranger over there and Astrenga from getting too boosted?
I've seen stranger things.
I have too. It was pretty good.
Happen.
So there is the Wyvern boosting the little Thrive buddies, little neckers there. Why are there 2 presents? Boosting them up and also taking a little bit of value off that Kid Bunny Sergeant. It's a very well-provisioned card.
And the fact that you're not trying to damage, well, actually, it doesn't matter too much, but the Drowner not coming down immediately shows, you know, both players know exactly how this matchup works, knows the Drowner, even though it was ideal to play, or most efficient in terms of point distribution to play it after the Neckers, get that buff, and then play the Wyvern after, get all of them buffs as well. That's how Thrive works. In this case, you want to use this to disrupt, like you said, the Trebuchet or the Selkirk, so it's safe for later. Even though it doesn't seem efficient in this specific matchup, it most definitely is.
And that Wyvern in the back row being utilized as bait, being like, go on, play your Trebuchet, go on, you can do it. I'm in the back row. But the boost, once again, going onto the Trident Infantry, hitting that Necker finally, but too little, too late.
Well, the question now is the Wyvern the bait for the Trebuchet, or is the Trebuchet the bait for the Drowner, so that Selkirk survives?
Oh,
I got you, Jagras.
It's getting too complicated here. It's maybe, I don't know. I think like Selkirk in round 1 is a big committal from Queen Meave, I would say. You know, given the state of the board. And here comes the Drowner. Turns out Trebuchets can drown. They cannot swim. Panda, I did not know this.
I'm not sure. You have to point out where the mouth is after this game. I'm not too sure on the anatomy of a trebuchet, but I'll let you give me that science class later on. We talked about the Thrive working kind of against randomized damage, where the Necker got pinged down back to 1, and he got, you know, the free point because of the Thrive effect from the Drowner anyway. So that's kind of damage that was, you know, mitigated and non-existent basically for the Meave list in the last round.
Yeah, and I really am enjoying this sequencing from Telebot. You know, knowing the tools that his opponent has at their disposal and playing your cards around it, I think, is really nice. And we see comfortably 4 Thrive units on the side of Telebot, and that, if you don't have removal for them, is going to add up to some big points as things start ramping up. And potentially a 5th here as Neca Warrior is just chilling, having a real good time.
The big double boost comes down. Igni, not a thing just yet. Also, of course, the NS Stranger works before the opponent's next turn, so blocks it in theory anyway, boosting that infantryman to a 10. And this is where it gets tricky. I mean, the engines can't be answered by Tailbot, but Monsters is very well known for having a lot of reach. Reach in the case of Gwent, it means that you have the chance to play a burst play and to catch up very quickly. Some decks don't have much reach, they have to play more kind of even points over quite a few rounds and catch up that way. Whereas Monsters can play slow, start off with a very low, very weak Thrive unit, and then start getting a ton of points later on by kind of getting that exponential value.
Yeah, and I think this is I would say probably where you pass. You can try and high roll the Naglfar onto Geralt. Well, there you go. Never mind. You tried to high roll the Naglfar. And Endless Wrath may look like, you know, that would be good. You can use it to deal damage, but it's damage based on the largest unit on your side of your board. And if the largest unit on your side of the board is in fact a 2-point Neca, President's not big enough to deal with Anna, and she gets to continue to boost. But this does thin the Brewis out, which you know, isn't really a core card. She's utilized mostly to consume a Foglet and also to boost the other crones. You know, not all crones are created equal, and Basket Head, while she may be beautiful truly on the inside and out, not the bestest of crones, it does put that Endless Wrath on the top of the deck, however, so getting that engine removal set up for future rounds.
The inside maybe, the outside maybe not so much. Personally don't find people with buckets on their head attractive, but maybe that's just my very odd taste.
Marshmallow would be offended, you know?
That's not my problem. But Forktail could come down, but again, you have the Neckers in play, kind of plays against Forktails, and Witchers haven't been played by Colomoin, for example, so you don't have that extra synergy. You still have the perfect kind of Thrive value with the Necker Warrior coming down.
That's again, we're getting some of these more expensive spends out of Colomoin, but Colomoin, you know, if he wins this round, can secure himself the last say. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly, like I say, how this round kind of turns out. 32 points to 14, but 12 points from Spear Tip, 3 Thrive units on the board. That's a 15-point play, and suddenly that gap not so scary. But Strenga, she's getting stronger and stronger.
We talked about the reach that Woodland Spirit and Monsters has. You have the extra 8 if you want as well. It's normally a finisher, but it can be used if you want to kind of have control of round 2 and you think you need to win round 1.
Yeah, he could potentially squeeze Meave completely out, utilizing the woodland.
The spear tip, a very good representation of reach as well. There's some very long arms. I mean, if you really start analyzing this, maybe too long.
That's perspective.
It's like the opposite of a T-Rex.
Is he in a bucket?
He has 2 bucket heads.
2 bucket heads are better than 1. That's just how it goes in Gwent. And Tailbot really coming down to the line here about opting for the pass. And I think this is fine. I think that you could have maybe tried to make that push, but you'd have to have spent Woodland to do it. Alternatively, you know, you keep your good cards and you move on. You've got Vess out of the way, you've got Anna out of the way, and there's a Witcher.
Is it really fine, though? It was a 4-card hand for Colomon, so he has a chance to go into a 10-card round 3 against monsters, which isn't typically kind of the scariest deck in the long round. Has a few engines in quotation marks in the Thrive units, but a lot of them were played in round 1 already, so not too many left. We do see the Neckers and the Wyvern. The Necker Warrior was mulliganed. Necker Warrior, some people might think it's a very, decent card, but really not that much because you waste a lot of those Thrive points. It's already starting at 4, so you can't get the kind of the stairway going.
Yep, and typically you're also playing it late if you have other Thrive units in hand, so it is, like you say, a little bit of a tricky one to get going. In terms of the long rounds, it's hard to say, Long rounds are a problem, but like we said, Tailbot does have control options. We see Imlerith, for example, here in hand, and also options for his own long rounds with the Forktail deploy, damaging all other units by 1. If the side of the board over here is much fuller, this could potentially provide, decent amounts of value.
But it plays against Neckers as well, so it's tricky to get the full value. Obviously, if you're not playing Witchers in your deck and your opponent is playing Witchers, then already it's a great meta call because you can pretty much always find the guaranteed value for a Forktail if you play it after your opponent's Witchers. And because Witchers aren't really a committal play, you can just play them early, get the 9 points on the board. That's it. You can normally expect to get the Forktail out of the way soon. And there we see it. Neckers come down, and they don't block the Forktail value in round 3, for example.
Yep, and that's kind of the decision that you're going to make. Do you want to kind of invest in Neckers, or do you want to invest in Forktails? Which one do you think is going to do better in the stock market? And opting to keep hold of that Forktail going forward here. Foglet, not what you want to see. Enraged Ifrit, though, is a fantastic pull, but 2 Forktails? Well, and a Necker Warrior? It's not the spiciest.
Well, I mean, it's not bad either. Against Witchers, you can damage all of them. You can play Necker Warrior and get kind of the 1 ping of damage and the 1 Thrive to get it back up again after. So it's kind of like not playing anything before. You're not damaging units, really. So it's not too bad either.
Especially when you haven't seen the Witcher thin and you expect the Blue Stripe Commando, Blue Stripe Scout combo. That is going to get bodies on the board, and bodies on the board means points in the bank when the Forktail stocks start to go up. So we'll see. Well, we will see exactly how valuable these cards are as the match goes on. Currently, Tailbot's turn to decide how he wants to open here, and a lot of reactive plays. Do you play a Forktail here just because there's nothing on the board and you get 4-point body? Do you play something big like maybe not Coldwell, but maybe the Spear Tip on the off chance if it does get killed, you can Ozril it?
Yeah, I think it's not too bad of an idea. I mean, you lose some Thrive pings, but there isn't really too much Thrive in hand, just that 1 Wyvern. You can play the Caldwell as well. I think you're not too scared if you are Tailbot about not having the highest unit generally, and you have Imlerith's Wrath now unblocked for pretty much removal on anything. So Botchling comes down, we talked about it before. Forktail pings on it, doesn't really care, just brushes it off and switches form. But an Imlerith's Wrath hammer from above will definitely get rid of it.
Yeah, I also expect that we will in fact see a Weavis pretty soon. She's going to be used to boost an ally, and there's not really things you necessarily want to protect, but what it will also do is increase the damage of Whispers, and getting Whispers to that 6-point damage mark is going to be very powerful. You say, removing things like a Botchling, potentially like a Selkirk or an Ockfist. There is no Ockfist, but...
Well, there's an Ockfist in hand.
Oh, there is. My bad.
It's very sneaky, though.
Gotta put my glasses back on. He's a sneaky dragon. Botchling coming down there and pinging that Coldwell. This is where you got to start making decisions and also deciding how to utilize Thrive, because if you delay the Thrive, it's not quite as good.
There's the Imlerith's Wrath. No unit played either. It's a kind of a turn you skip in terms of unit, in terms of that advantage or disadvantage, which means that the Forktail gains a little bit more value. But you also got removed a unit from Colombo inside, so net positive there for this round.
9 turns remaining with that Botchling, which left unchecked equates to what, about 15 points of value, considering it was at a 6. So you're actually technically trading up there. In terms of, although you only dealt 6 damage and you had the potential for 10, you've actually removed 15 points with that play, and 15 points is nothing to turn your nose up at.
Now that the players have each other's lists, Tailbot knows exactly what to play around, what the scariest engines are. There's no Hubert in this, so that changes the dynamic quite a bit. And his Strenger's very scary, 2 points per turn instead of 1. Is quite scary, but she has been killed already. And now you have, for example, the Commando. It gets buffed by 1, which means the Enraged Ifrit cannot kill it. So you can't really do much about that right now.
Yeah, I think you just accept that play. But if you have 2 Forktails,
yeah,
seeing the rows get stacked with Commandos isn't necessarily the best plan. Going Commando, not always the best plan depending on the situation. So I don't think Tailbot's going to be too kind of upset about that. And we'll see, whether he chooses to, like I say, play that 1 Thrive unit in his hand, the Wyvern, whether he chooses to maybe utilize, like I said, the Weavis or go down some other chain of play. And there's the Wyvern.
This means the Commando has to be played this turn, or else it's going to be in the range of the Enraged Ifrit next turn. So the sequencing matters a lot for Colomone. He can't, get too sleepy on this play. He has to do it right away, just to make sure he can play around that.
Yeah, and I think at this point it's also just a fair play. Get that copy in the deck and then thin it straight out, guaranteeing that play. And, there's nothing that needs to be removed. Although, I say there's nothing that needs to be removed. It depends on how worried you are about this Wyvern, I suppose. But, if the Wyvern does get a little bigger, you can currently still Selkirk it. It's not that big. And actually opting to play the Scout. And yeah, going Commando seems to be the option right now.
And it's a +2 or -2 unit. It's an advantage for Tailbot, which means the Forktail gains that +2 of value once it's played. But because there's a Thrive unit on the board, it's actually a +3. The Thrive is kind of invisible to Forktail's damage because of how the sequencing works with the damage and the buff, because of the Thrive kind of resets it in a way.
But do you hold on to that Forktail? You lose the Thrive.
Yeah, you haven't seen the Witchers. I would definitely wait.
Because of the Witchers, yeah. I think it's kind of, you sacrifice the Thrive, but waiting for the Witchers, I think, is a fair play. And there is the Weavis boost, which makes good friend Wispus over here much more powerful. And that 6 points is going to, you can't deny the Selkirk removal. You can't deny the Orcvis removal with the 1 point buff from the move. You can save Naneki, but I think Naneki, out of these 3 targets, is maybe the lower priority.
That's a sequencing as well, where if you wait too long, your opponent plays the Selkirk, you have to play the Weavis before you can unlock the full damage on Wispus. So the chance you have to play it, you have to play it earlier, as soon as possible, to get that ready to go for when you need it, for when Colomone plays that Orcvis, plays that Selkirk.
And here the option, there is I was going to say the option of Enraged Ifrit, which we do see used to take out that Thrive unit. So the Thrive unit thrives no longer. And when we talked about the Forktails and utilizing them for the boost, I think when you expect Enraged Ifrit, it's a sacrificial Wyvern, and so holding on to them definitely fine. And until the Witchers come out, we won't see them get played out, I would imagine. Though, do you think that means that Colomone's going to hold his Witchers?
For a tiny bit, I think he knows what he's playing around. He doesn't know there's 2 Forktails in hand, but he definitely knows there might be 1. We see the buff here on the Enraged Ifrit. Maybe Tailbot, missing his glasses, might think it's a Chironex. And he could maybe play around that at the next level mind game here, the 4D chess from Colomone.
Yeah,
trying to get any amount of advantage possible.
Tailbot is in fact wearing his glasses, so I don't think that he will be bamboozled there by the Ifrit play. But then what do you do here? Do you play Toll? Do you play that?
Well, there's not a punish, really. The deck list, in general, the faction isn't going to punish you too much for it. The more time the Spear Tip is vulnerable in this matchup, the more time you have the chance to get more optimal Osro value from the Silver Lining. If it dies, you can consume a bigger unit. But instead, the Forktail comes down.
7 points is fine.
Tailbot can't possibly think the Witchers aren't in hand, though.
Yeah, but does Colomone put Tailbot on 2 Forktails? Is this the Forktail bamboozle? In terms of the Osro, though, what kind of value? Oops, that's Woodland Spirit.
That's not a graveyard.
We'll get there eventually. What kind of value are you seeing? It's not the spiciest. We've got 5 over here, and if we go looking in this graveyard, again, it's a 5. So it's not really going to be the Osrol to end all Osrols.
It'll be a sad one, but Caldwell can, maybe. Well, I don't think he'll die anytime soon. Unless Selkirk gets really, really buff, gets a nice few days at the gym, goes up to 9, and then maybe does the Battle of a Century. But
I don't expect that we'll see it. I feel like you would remove Selkirk here. You have the option to do it with the Wispus. So this is where this is where you have to decide, do you worry more about Selkirk or do you worry more about Orcvis? Selkirk can get strong, though. You've got that unicorn. You can ride the unicorn to the gym, have a good workout, come back and kill Caldwell. And
you haven't seen Naneki or the unicorn, so there's a chance for that to get very nasty very quickly. Normally, Orcvis tends to be the more valuable place for seeing a Hubert list, for example, but in this case, Selkirk could be scary. It's a hypothetical in the air. Tailbot has to, ask himself the question, how much does he respect this man? I would respect him quite a bit. Ronvid, looking quite weak, but this guy's looking very nasty.
He does look very nasty. If you stay a little bit too long, though, he gets even nastier. That's nasty. Let's get rid of that. And Enraged Ifrit pinging down the Selkirk and, saying that if you are going to buff it, which is a possibility, you can't buff it too high. And considering we haven't seen Kyra next, that buff would only bring it up to a 5. So I really like this play coming out of Tailbot, and he's one smart cookie.
I think if, a boost has to come in now or else Forktail can come down, it would miss the Witches, but being able to kill the Selkirk would be pretty huge. I think it would be okay if there isn't a buff coming in now, but Meave is there. Unicorn is in hand as well. Neki can come down as well. She does have Order though, no Zeal, so can't come down immediately. And
yeah, you'd have a turn to kind of think about it. But Meave, though, she can protect this Selkirk from the Forktail, so I don't think that we'll see Forktail. I would imagine we'll see that buff onto the Selkirk. Maybe the Unicorn to make him even bigger, up to a 6. It's not that much bigger than how he started. He's been skimping on his gym time, but still 6 damage onto well, I guess you probably target a 4 rather than the 12.
Yeah, the 12 would be a losing battle. Unicorn does come down, buffs it up to 5. No Kyra next to get that extra +4 boost instead of just the regular 4. And Selkirk can be saved. He gets the buff from...
But doesn't get the attack.
But does not. So again, you can save it. This is something you can save for later, especially with Hubert list. You can save that damage for the very last round. In this case, just trying to see if he can boost it up even higher. He has a Neki as well. He can try and find more value even. And he knows that for the most part, Monsters doesn't have too much control. Normally you would not do this. It's very risky against locks, against removal. But in this case, he's seen the Enraged Ifrit. He's seen, he hasn't seen the Wispus.
And he hasn't seen Geralt, but Geralt, unfortunately, is chilling out with a Drowner and some Foglets in the graveyard. He's busy hunting monsters in the graveyard, so he's not helping out monsters on the board, unfortunately. And yeah, this Selkirk with this Naneki could prove pretty powerful. Removing a unit, and with Colomone having last say, you can't then eat the target from the graveyard with the Yellowstone.
Wispus being hovered. Wispus, I think, might just see some action here. Front row still playing around those trebuchets that aren't in hand, but could have been played by Colomone in this turn.
I think it's correct. If you see the Selkirk not being utilized like that, then it's usually because you want to buff it further, right? So in that situation, if you think the Selkirk's going to get even bigger with the Neki, which we see straight away now, this is 100%. Where the way that I would play this. But with that said, we also have this Trident Infantry, not a powerful play on the side of Colomone. But the Witchers, he may actually hold on to
not powerful normally, but with the Neki's boots coming in, that's 3 extra points of value for free. There's no real answer from Tailbot in hand, and you have the Meave buff the next turn as well. So all of a sudden, a measly little bronze with a tiny sword.
6 points.
And yeah, definitely above the provision cost. So not too shabby.
Have you seen some of those Crimson Curse cards, man? So, really Tailbot sitting, waiting with this Forktail, deciding, where it is he wants to go, what it is he wants to do here. He still has the 8 points in pocket on the Woodland Spirit, 29 to 25, and not really answers for the cards here. So I feel like the only sequencing that's going to be, incredibly important necessarily is the Forktail and how that kind of turns out with Colomone deciding to play out his Ogfist and his Witchers. You think boost the Trident here?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, no chance of risking it any longer. Gonna get the full value from Neki being, now the Order ability is available. There wasn't any Zeal on her, but she can play it now. And just to wait for the Trident Infantry to come onto the board anyway, so it's almost, inconsequential. And you have the Meave buff as well available, so I don't see why not.
Yeah, and there's a large number of points in both players' hands. 8 in pocket, 12. We've got the Forktail. There's a lot of targets on the side. Well, more targets on the side of Colomone, so it's going to be more than the 4 points of face value, but not that much more. A couple points. 6.
Buffs come down from Meave and from Neki onto these infantrymen. He's going to be pinging everyone. I get a taste of his sword.
Oh, but he's getting big. But 7 is a good point to stop. 7. If you stop at 7, then no Geralt shall be around. Although Geralt, like I said, not in the hand of Tailbot, and it's gonna be pretty close, I would say, with these Witchers, and it may come down to sequencing. But the thing is, Colomone has to play Witchers last if he wants Ogfist to trigger. So that Forktail's not going to see the kind of value that it would like to see, and I think that might cost him the game.
The point gap is pretty close right now. 20 in hand, basically with the spear tip and the woodland buff onto it. Also going to guarantee the highest unit by far on the board. No real punish. Okfist going to be worth about 13 points.
13
5
plus 9
plus
from
the
the
8.
Witchers.
But then the Forktail, yeah, has been played. So Colomon very...
22 to 20, I think it is. I think Colomon has this by 2 points. That's my prediction. You heard it here first.
There's the biggest of boys coming down. 9 points from the Witcher, 10 if you add the Meave buff as well. Actually 11 because of the Meave buff on the Infantryman.
3 points. Now that's the kind of 4 points. 4 points because of the Meave buff on the Instrument, I think. Yeah.
Okfist comes down. The Meave pings. Damages and Tailbot
Not
taking
enough.
it by
the
1
wrong
point.
Way. Oh, you can't. This quick kind of maths with these kind of games. That was insane. I thought Colomon maybe had just pipped him out with the value of those Witchers plus the value of the Okfist, but Tailbot, that was
even
a game.
saving the Witchers to the very end, playing to his outs, playing not only around one Forktail but around 2 different Forktails. The sequencing, you know, you could say it's perfect from Colomon, but even then the value there was no ordering or sequencing you could do to win that round with the hands in both, with the cards in both players' hands. And Tailbot was 2-0 down.
And now it's 2-2.
He beats Meave once. He beats Meave twice. He has to beat Meave a 3rd time to take the series and get a reverse sweep against Colomon. An hour ago, he was maybe doubting a bit. You know, this player's very strong. The Meave list is pretty strong as well, but right now he has to be, you know, much happier.
I don't think beating people is necessarily, you know, the kindest thing to do. But sometimes, you know, when it comes down to Gwent,
there's $3,000 on the line.
You got to do what you can
I want to beat someone.
Hopefully,
that's big money, Jaggers.
It's not me. But moving on. This is spicy. Morvran versus Meave final game, and both of these players, fantastic players. So we will see exactly how this turns out going into the final set, and you know, right down to the wire with these small numbers. Like we talked about it, you know, small points, small misplays. These things do matter. And that game again was down to 1 point.
It was. My memory's very bad,
Pretty
but
close.
1 or 2. Let's leave it at that.
We've got some NA maths going on here on the Cast of Death.
Well, that's NA memory. Okay, I'm not going to say, you know, my mind's not in its greatest spot. Maybe let's just say that. But right away we see Nilfgaard, the last remaining deck for Tailbot. He has to play it. He has no choice. And we see Colomon again. He's had this, you know, no choice for the past hour or so. Maybe starting to hate Neve a tiny bit, saying, "Come on, you have 3 chances. Just do it. Just win the game, please."
Just do it. Why? But the thing is, Nilfgaard's going to be a tough matchup. We talk about control options. We see locks. We see Leos. We see Yimpy Goo, and you know, we've got resets. There's all sorts of things, and Chillard as well. For you know, we've seen that hit of Selkirk, and that was not, you know, fun times. So this is anyone's set. You know, this one Nailbiter, 60% in favor of Tailbot, 40% in favor of Colomon, and we got game 5, the first game 5 of the tournament. How does it feel?
Is it the first?
Well, the last set was 5 games, but one of them was a draw.
So it's not the first.
It doesn't count.
So you lied to the viewers, Jaggers. How does that feel?
Feels good. Imagine going on the internet,
Nausicaa
telling
Sergeant
lies.
coming down, the engine starting off right away for Tailbot. Again, because he started off on blue coin, he's going to be back on blue coin for game 5. He managed to tie the series for now. Already climbed most of the mountain. He sees the peak. It's very close. Will he trip and fall to his death? It's possible.
He's going to trip and fall to his death.
Will he make it to the top of Mount Everest? It's also possible. Tailbot is a strong man. Those biceps will take him very far in life and on the Everest.
Yeah, but you need leg day too if you're going to be climbing. And we saw the tactical advantage there played onto this Nausicaa Sergeant. Tailbot not worried about toll removal. Knowing the deck list, you know when to invest your points, and if you want to protect a target, then Nausicaa Sergeant, not usually the target that people pick, but if you're not worried about him getting removed as he grows, then it's perfectly fine. Tried him infantry. Again, shooting the poor man on a horse. Every time he goes to the gym, he then decides to go, you know, deal some damage. He's feeling pretty strong and shooting that Nausicaa Sergeant. And we're just going to see how this plays out as both players typically committing bronze cards. But, you know, if you have a hand like Tailbot's, you cannot commit bronze cards. That's not what you want to see.
So Frenzy Dow wasn't a great option already, but now it's definitely not. A 1-point destroy an artifact that doesn't exist is definitely going to be a mulligan, I think, for later on.
For sure, that is, but also not necessarily the target that Tailbot was hoping to hit. I don't think he expected the Frenzy Dow in the hand of Colomon, if only because it's also artifact removal, you know, so it's not the strongest of gold cards and potentially could have been mulligan fodder.
Again, this tech wasn't really, I think, targeting Northern Realms particularly.
Nope.
If it hit something, you know, a Selkirk great, you know, let's celebrate. But for the most part, it's more for monsters that have the Spear Tip, for example, Count Caldwell, and also Skellige. Bran he let through. Maybe this was one of the reasons why. He had a pretty good matchup with Schiller, adding an extra few points to his win rate with Nilfgaard.
That is true, but I mean, I would argue things like Neneki, things like Okvist, things like Botchling are nice targets because if you bring them down to 1 point, they are much, much easier to remove. So in terms of the available other targets, I think Dow is actually pretty good for Colomon, and Talbot not getting the kind of value out of Schiller that he would maybe want to see.
We see again the infantry. I've been calling it infantryman the whole time. So the infantry and the sergeant couple, once again, getting a nice synergy there.
Yep,
the zeal effect means you don't have to really wait, so it's not going to be vulnerable for a turn, and you can just get that value right away. And we do have locks in hand for Talbot, so he has a chance to stop the engine if he wants to.
I don't think that's where you're spending your locks. You're going to have to think, you know, how many control options do I have? How many locks do I have, and how many lock targets do I have? And I don't think an infantry is a lock target. And I think Talbot agrees as we see the Witchers coming down, thinning out the deck, stacking up the front row, having a real good party, and you know, playing around the Trebuchet, because we don't have the Drowner this time, but playing right into that Lacerate that is sitting pretty there in the hand of Colman.
And it's going to be easy for Colman to catch up. He is on red coin. He is the one that's kind of putting pressure on Talbot to play points and be able to keep his card for round 2 or round 3 if he ends up losing this round 1. So it gets risky. Colman can play his own Witcher if Talbot, you know, falls too much into the trap of I'm playing around Trebuchets, I'm going to play all front row. He can give Colman a ton of reach and a ton of value to catch back up with, you know, just a pretty simple 7 provision bronze card.
But talking about cards in hand, I really, really like Gimpy here because we keep seeing the Blue Stripe Commando play. We see the Blue Stripe Commandos with the Blue Stripe Scout setting up 3 targets for Gimpy Gerwin, so a nice little counter there. And that's a card that I don't think we're going to see until we start to see Commandos. But, you know, if Colomon expects that, then maybe he's not going to try and make that play.
Now Talbot, he has an out. He can say, you know, this is getting scary. Lacerate might be in hand. For Colomon, he's getting a ton of value from this infantry as well. Maybe it's my time to get out of here.
But do you want to give, you know, control of the round length to a Queen of Eve deck?
Well, control is scary if you don't have options to answer back to it. Or engines are scary if you don't have control to answer back. But when you have, you know, a ton of locks, you have some removal as well with Gimpy and with Letho. It's not as scary.
But I mean, I would say I think it's kind of tricky here because you do have a couple answers. You have 2 locks at the moment, but 2 locks isn't enough to answer all of these engines. Leo, you need a target that's big enough in order to kill it. You know, you need something large and in charge with at least 8 points. And against this kind of Northern Realms deck, you know, how likely is it that we're going to see that? Peter here getting played to take the points off of that Tridam. So we saw him get boosted up, and that is the kind of folly with the Tridam, is that as you boost him up, you are dealing damage, but that does put all of your boosts on one target, and Peter, he's there to restore him down to size, and did reset that unit back down to 3, making the gap 11 points in favor of Talbot, and really putting a little bit of pressure on Colomon.
These are the cards that you want to kind of, you play them differently in different matchups when you want to try and get, for example, in Monsters, you know Peter's going to get really good value as a last save card in round 3, so you want to save that. It gains so much more value. Against Northern Realms, not really the case for the most part, so you can expend it round 1 and not feel too bad about it. We talked about the you know, pressure from Colomoan breathing down Talbot's neck. Lacerate comes out. He's a point ahead. As long as he can keep this up and stay ahead.
But this is tricky because what do you spend as Talbot? I think you know, Unicorn is maybe your only option here. You want to hold the Letho lock, you want to hold the Orcs lock. A Seer, you use to cycle something back into your deck. Leo doesn't have a target.
Roach was killed, so a Sire is back on the menu for 9 points. Could be an option to try and create a bit more of a gap here and try and say, you know, Colomoan, please have mercy. Let me get out of this round alive, because right now, Colomoan is unrelenting. Gets that point swing with Lacerate we mentioned before as well. No Trebuchet in hand, so Talbot was playing against it, around himself. He played himself, basically. Letho does come down, kills a Witcher.
That is true. And I think using Leo on the Witcher here is actually, you know, the best value you're probably going to see out of him. Looking for that 8 points is really nice, but if you can get 6 points of value rather than 3 points of value, you do that. Opting to kill Eskel, that's not canon. I'm disappointed, Talbot. We talked about this.
Now this 6 point gap is very important against a deck like Northern Realms that doesn't have as much of a burst. It's more of a play a card. If it survives a round, then you get that value from it, the extra value. So Selkirk Even with the Meve buff, it would go up to 6. It would be a tie. There's no engine ticking right now for Colomon either. So same with bossing, it would be 6 points. But again, that gap, exactly 6 points, is a big enough gap for Tailbot. I think he definitely knows this. He says, my opponent either plays something very strong now. He can play the Vest, for example, for 7. But he can't play a lot of that 6-point threshold cards like... Oh, he can if he wants to.
He's got Meve, and that will trigger at the end of this turn. So actually, he's going to be 1 point ahead with the... Also with the extra damage from the boost, actually. 2 points ahead. So he's managed to kind of create that room. And we talked about kind of the points, but you can't disregard that 1 point from Meve. That can really pip you over the edge. On the flip side, though, you know, if we have Morvran here, Morvran can be utilized to deal 2 extra points. So if you really want to cinch out this round, he does have that to fall back on. But actually opting to bow out on even cards.
And this is very important as well. The 5 cards in hand pass from Tailbot means that both players draw to 8. If Colomon wants to bleed, if he dry passes, that's fine. Tailbot can play a card into it and just pass and goes back up to 10. Both players have 10 cards. Colomon has last say, but that's all he has as an advantage. In this case, Colomon has to play and bleed into round 2. If Tailbot is able to catch up on every single one of his plays, the fact he lost on even cards in round 1 is just doesn't matter.
Yep, that's true.
So it's going to be tough. Normally, if you have to play around, you know, you can't play your engines early, you can't ever fall behind. So it makes the game, you know, it's hard mode Gwent basically, especially against a player like Colomon. It's ultimate hard mode, but it's possible for Tailbot to not get punished for that round 1 losing on even, basically.
That's fair, and I think he got to the point where he just didn't want to commit anymore. I think holding the Unicorn in order to boost up your Kyrenex and give you that removal is something that you want to do, but no Kyrenex actually on the side of Tailbot. We see the blue stripe Commando, there he is in all of his glory, on the side of Colomon. So, you know, at this point, he's up 7 cards, right? So he can choose to pass after this and go to the final round of 10 cards. But if he wants to keep playing, we've got this blue stripe scout. So now you have this decision if you want to utilize your scout combo. And if we see that happen, then it suggests that actually Colomon intends to play a little bit into this round, but that denies a little bit of value from your engines.
And because there aren't even cards, it makes this bleed for Colomon not as risky. It's basically like playing a warm-up round 3, where if you win it, well, you 2-0'd your opponent, you won the game, you won the series, you're going to the final. If you lose it, you still have that chance to roll a good top deck in round 3 and go for the win there anyway. It's normally a trap to try and go into this mindset because sometimes you want to, you know, pass at a certain point to get the value and get a better round 3 anyway, but it is a possibility.
Yeah, we see the Nausicaa Sergeant there on the side of Tailbot being utilized. Also, the Morvran ability to boost it up to 5, make it even Stevens with Colomon, make it a little bit, I guess, harder to remove by something, say, like a Vez, dealing 4 points of damage. Also had a little peek of the week into this deck, spotted Vincent Mays, so he knows that is not in the hand of Colomon. So the reveal, you know, it can actually give you some really useful information depending on what you see, but sometimes you also see the same card twice. It's random, so he may reveal Vincent Mays once again if he chooses to use that leader.
And Gimpy Gerwin could come down to the Commandos if the kind of usual play is made here with the Blue Stripe Scouts and the Order ability now being active for the Commando in that front row. But again, this is all about, I think, Colomon trying to go for some optimal long run value to see where this bleed goes, kind of, you know, feel out Tailbot's hand and his game plan. But both players definitely playing for engines here.
Yep, and we see all of those Commandos on the board there. You know, it looks like a pretty big play, 12 points there on the side of Queen Meve and Colomon. However, Gimpy, he's going to deal 3 damage to each of those copies should he get played here, which I imagine that he would. So 9 points of value plus his 3 is an equals and answering 12 points. Plus the deploy effect boosting this Nausicaa Sergeant. Whenever you play a unit with deploy, he gets bigger. So actually a 13-point play, and I believe that will just pip him ahead of Colomon by 1 point.
And 13, or 12 actually, you have to count the deploy effect onto the Sergeant instead, for the value per provision, but 12 points for 8 provisions is definitely fantastic.
Yeah, this is the card that's very matchup dependent is Gimpy. He does very well against these kind of matches. So the Commando strategies, he does pretty well against Nekas, he does well against Slave Infantry, he does very well against Draug. And then you see a Shoop list and you're like, oh.
It's kind of like Peter. Some matchups very good, some matchups kind of the throwaway goals where you can play it, get the 7, 8 points. It's fine, but nothing too flashy, whereas Gimpy here is the superstar, or one of the superstars in this matchup at least, gets full value onto the Commandos, or more than full value.
Yep, and also pushes Tailbot ahead of Colomon, and Tailbot has to kind of stay ahead here because he wants to go into the final round on even cards, at least. So it has to keep that lead by at least 1 point. Though having Morvran available does mean he can kind of edge out Colomon if the gap gets pretty close. And Arguably, you want to win by as few points as possible. You don't want to spend too much here, and so far, I really think Tailbot hasn't spent too much. But, I mean, arguably, neither has Kolomoen.
But now if Kolomoen passes now, it's a feels bad moment because you say, you know, I have this great advantage by going a card up, by winning round 1 on even. I wasted my last rate, which could be very good in a long round to do so. And if I give up, you know, now where Tailbot is a point above me, then I don't get that extra card going into round 3. So I think he wants to try and push, try and feel out Tailbot, see where he is. And it might just be a top-deck situation going into round 3. Looking at the draws here, I mean, there's a few fairly good draws for a short round. Unicorn, solid 8 points. The Enrage Ifrit as well.
But this current board state puts Tailbot in a really tricky position because Vess gives a unit Zeal, which means that instantly Selkirk can fight something. Instantly you can trigger your Opus. You probably wouldn't with 2 cards on the opposite side, but still, it gives him a little bit of versatility. If he had Naneki, he could instantly play her. And that starts to put pressure on Tailbot if that is something that happens. So Tailbot now has to make a decision. Do I remove Vess or not?
Well, I mean, the Letho's a choice. You have the Sarah in hand.
But you give up a lock.
You give up a lock, but puts you 4 points ahead. The gap is even more in your favor. You have a little bit of a cushion there if you want to play more of a slower tempo play to control the engine play from Kolomoen. You have that chance. You have the 4-point gap now instead of just that 1 point from before. So slowly Tailbot is trying to make sure he's not going to lose a card going into round 3. I think Tailbot is the one in the kind of losing position right now. He's the one that has to kind of say, you know, I'm going to high roll into a good top deck round 3. I can still win this as long as I keep up the tempo here.
I don't know, though. I wonder if, you know, spending Seret there may have been the better decision. It depends on whether you want to lock multiple targets with Orcs or just one, and that's kind of what it comes down to, is what do you want to lock with Orcs? Because Seret deals, if Orcs is hand, 5 points of damage, but things like Selkirk and Okvis, if they get boosted by Meave, out of that range. So you can't immediately shut them down. Although you can knock him down a peg or 2 and bring him down to 1 point, which means his battle capabilities are lower. However, Kidweni's going to make him a little bit more, you know, a little bit more powerful. So it's tricky.
Selkirk gets scary here. You can lock it with Ox. Can't kill it.
But if you lock it, what do you do about Okvist?
Well, you pray to the gods that...
Because the thing is also, as soon as you play Orcs, you're then losing value on that Seret, and the Seret's a 3, which is even worse. So in some ways, I feel like you have to play Seret before you play Orcs.
But at 6 strength, it's not going to kill it. You know, there could be a Unicorn in hand for Kolomoen. There is going to be a Sergeant for sure. You give Selkirk the chance to get some value. You let it slip through. You still stay ahead. Like you mentioned, there was a bit of a point gap before, thanks to Letho being played. And now you can play kind of a weaker bronze and still stay 3 points ahead. But now you have the order ability coming online and the card being played. And
it has a juicy target with Letho because you boost that up to 6, you knock down the 6, that's suddenly an 11-point play. And then, you know, 3-point difference, that makes it 8 points ahead. And then 8 points is tricky to overcome. Although, with the Morvan Leader ability, like I said, gives you 2 extra points to your plays. You do have options in terms of,
Sire's 9 points.
Seret's 10, Unicorn's 8. So you do have those options.
And Asire is certainly a kind of a play you want to save if possible for round 3 because it's a play that doesn't rely on your opponent's board. It's proactive. You can play it first if your Tailbot are going to be going first in round 3, and you have the chance to just play it. And the board state does not matter at all. It's just 9 points right away.
And then it comes down to then the shorter, this kind of mid to short length round though, because Kolomoen, like I said, he's in control here. He's won 1 round, so it's up to him how long he wants to push this. But certain cards like the Reinforced Trebuchet, for example, just do not represent value. Well, if there's nothing in the range, they don't represent value anyway, but also they don't represent value in a short round. We did see last round 1, which means the Trebuchet is likely to just be mulligan fodder, I think, at this point. Tailbot can quite comfortably play into the front row without too much concern. Although, Seer, if you want Roach, you've got to put her in the back.
Not only that, a Seer also gives that unit disadvantage, which means that it's 1 extra unit coming on the board than should be. Normally it's 1 unit per play, per turn, which means Okvis gets better as well. So if you can win with the Sire, if you have to play around 2 in this bleed, it's best to play as late as possible to play around the Okvis as well. So, and Roach is, like you said, a Sire back row. Roach could be back row as well if he summons himself there, or summons herself there.
Did you know Sarah is a girl? That's a lie, it's a boy. I found this out yesterday. I've played Gwent for 2 years, and nobody thought to tell me, hey, Jaggerus, you see Seret? You see this card?
Well,
that's not a lady.
He has pretty much 95% of her face, or his face covered, so.
I think it's a fair mistake. I haven't played The Witcher 2, unfortunately, so I did not know. And nobody thought to tell me. Did you know Roach was a girl?
I did. I found that one out pretty soon as a caster. It's one of the first harsh lessons you get casting over Gwent.
Yeah, Gwent community is very, it's very important that you know that A, Roach is a girl, and B, it's Geralt, not Gerald, and Yennefer, not Jennifer.
I think that's a pretty easy one to spot right away.
That's true. So 18 points on the side of Tailbot, 1 point ahead, and we talked about this gap, and Ockfist.
Ox gonna come in.
Yeah, I think so.
Can lock it. Serret loses value, but with Serret you can kill the Ockfist right away because it's at 6 strength thanks to the Meve buff. So getting it out of that damage rate. Normally 5 isn't the most common amount of removal, but in Nilfgaard it certainly is, and Colomoine knows it could be in hand.
Yep, I think
3 cards left.
think the Orcs is pretty nice here. Although you're playing the Ockfist having seen Unicorn, so you're not playing around Kyrenex, and I guess you're maybe trying to, I don't know, encourage that removal. But Orcs here will put them on even, so we'd have to see a more round.
Well, you have the deploy effect, so the Sergeant.
You tell a lie, the Sergeant
coming in clutch.
He is. He's doing very well for those 1 point differences.
Did it last turn as well with the Unicorn. It would have been an 8-point play, but because of the Sergeant buff, he went back up by 1 point.
The extra point on Gimpy as well. So that Sergeant, no wonder he got promoted. He is clearly a commanding officer in the ranks of the Nausicaa army. We get to look at him. He's so good. We'll have a peek.
Oh, we missed the action, but it was already forecasted. So Ox does come down. We see the lock there on Ockfist. The ability without a Zeal effect has to wait 1 turn, which gives enough of a window for this control list, the lock Nilfgaard to react. And the 1 point on Nausicaa Sergeant, again, keeps Tailbot alive. We talked about it from the beginning. He has to stay alive by at least 1 point after every single round. Until now, he has done it, and with his Sire and Serret in hand, I think he will be able to do it. And also the Morvran buffs being able to come in clutch if he needs them this round as well. But in this case, he's looking better for a round 3 top deck, right? He has 4 points on Morvran still.
I think that this is a pretty. It's not the comfiest place that Meve wants to be. The bleed though, but if you look at the draws, I mean, this is 6, not bad. Kyrenex good.
Or Kyrenex.
Knight when you're going first, that's okay. But there's a lot of stuff there that's maybe not what you want to see.
And the pass instead from Colomoine, I think at this point he knows he's probably not. He doesn't have that crazy of a burst like Ockfist was in hand, and he knows that even if it's 1 turn longer, Meve, that 1 extra point might win him the game in round 3. So he passes early. Looking at the top decks, they're not great.
No, not
for
great
Tailbot.
for Tailbot, and not really great for.
Oh, Anna Stranger is there. Double Trebuchet.
Yeah, well, Mulligan into Anna Stranger. Wolfpack's going in the bin. Slave Driver, do you value that? Oh, Treyharn.
Not great either. It's more of a carryover playing Infiltrator as well, so.
Slave Infantry. Treyharn, though, 4 points. Slave Driver, 4 points. Trebuchet, 4 points. Anna?
This is where Anna Stranger, even in a short round, when you get 2 points per turn for your engine, that could be game winning if there isn't an option to kill it at this point, and there isn't. I mean, you don't have any more locks, you have Serret, but it's not enough damage, and you have a ton of boosts to make sure, even if there was some damage, to keep Anna Stranger alive with Meve and also Naneki, so
you see that the Dow there down at 1 point, so we know now, well, Tailbot knows what the Shillard hits, and at this point it doesn't really matter necessarily what gets discarded here. This just gives Tailbot information. He knows what not to put Colomoine on, so he knows he's not on Vincent, he's not on Dow, what a surprise, and he's not on at least one of his trebuchets. But other than that, that information not the most useful because it does suggest stronger cards. Anna, though, we talked about her power and her boost. She can be boosted, sure, but we do have some damage options here. We have Serret for 3. We have Slave Driver for another couple, so up to 5 damage there. But like you said, Naneki, no options to counter her. So.
I mean, it's going to be close, but I do think Colomoine might just have this. Again, game 5 of this series has been very close. Every single game has been really, really close here. But the round 1, Tailbot was already, he felt the pressure from Colomoine. He had to really spend a lot in round 2 to keep up. He was able to keep a Sire, but even the 9-point swing there in a bit of a longer round 5 or round 3 here with 5 cards. Round 5 is not on a thing just yet.
But the question then is with the Anna, you have to set up her friendos. You have to put 2 people either side of her in order to see value. But, options to put next to her. Tridam is massive because every time he gets boosted, we've seen him pinging down that damage. And you'd either have to kill the Tridam or kill this or stop the Stringer. And you can't stop the Stringer, so then you have to try and kill the Tridam. But, if he's getting boosted, Serret's not going to be enough. So you can't answer either of those.
Tailbot is playing around the Trebuchet, playing front row. Last rate has been used, only 1 in the deck for Colomoine, so he knows not to play around that again. But even then, I mean, just all these cards that you want to have in round 1 or round 2, the carryover cards like Traherne, like Infiltrator, instead coming out in round 3, which as top decks are just really bad.
But you do see the boosts here utilized to actually protect the Tridem instead. You know, maybe a little bit worried about that Chiron X, I think. You see it brought up to 5 points, and that actually is going to, you know, stop the Stringer from being too strong. We do see value in boosting the Tridem because it shoots the units on this side of the board. And unfortunately, that slave driver got killed. If that had been pinged down to 1 damage, that then is a lovely slave infantry target. So
yeah, free value, but now there's only a 4 there, so a ton of value lost because of that double ping onto the slave driver. So unfortunate for Tailbot. Maybe game losing. That is, you know, a few points you lose right away because of that RNG ping from the infantry.
And this is kind of tricky because we do see that Chiron X damage, and that Chiron X could actually enable the slave driver. But if you want to see that, you have to spend Seret, and if you spend Seret, then you aren't removing the boost. So potentially, you know, maybe you go a Seer here on the back row just to get that Roach in play.
But if you go back row, then the Trebuchet comes online, so there's really, you know, no way out here for Tailbot. The Neki, there was 1 ping saved as well, so you probably want to play the Anna Strenger first, I think. You have 2 points per turn instead of 1. The Trebuchet offers.
True, but then those points would in fact get denied from by the Seret. And actually, it's going to be interesting to see how Tailbot utilizes these Morvran boosts, because if you expect Chiron X, you don't want Chiron X to kill your unit. You want Chiron X to bring it down to low values to provide value for that slave driver. So this is a very interesting match in terms of how this will turn out, because ideally, you know, he needs to boost Traherne and Roach up to 5, or above 5, before we see the Unicorn play. But then you've also got these engines you want to play. So Unicorn's likely to be played last because Stringer and Trebuchet, you know, provide value per turn. But it's, like I say, it's tough.
So Coleman playing safe, keeping 1 ping on a Neki still to buff Anna Stringer later on, wasting the Meave ping now, seeing if Tailbot spends his last little amount of control he has with Seret to not deny the Anna Stringer for the last 2 turns, and getting the Trebuchet value anyway this turn. And like we said, the Anna Stringer might buff the infantry. The infantry has random pings. If it happens to ping Roach twice, then slave infantry gains value as well. So,
but that's the thing is, like, that's not an obvious play with slave infantry. You wouldn't usually boost your 3, right? Because usually what you would do is transform the 3 as the lowest unit. So in terms of how this Morvran is utilized, it's going to be, I would say, very interesting.
And there's a control baited out by Colomoan. He maybe, you know, it's just the sequencing isn't there for Tailbot. He has to try and ensure the value on the slave infantry instead of the Seret, for example. He doesn't know that Anna Stringer is in hand currently for Colomoan. And there's a bit of a point gap now. Of course, the random pings might affect how much points the slave infantry is the next turn as well. We see 4 points still held on by Morvran for the very end here. But I think Colomoan does have this within the...
Yeah, it's going to be close. Again, we've seen a lot of these nail biters, and the Tridem infantry, if it does ping the Roach, you know,
10-point play
playing
Anna
into the slave
Stringer
infantry.
with the extra buffs. 8 points just from her body buffing the units on the sides, and then
shooting a Seer.
Yeah, it's going to be too much.
6 in hand for Morvran.
It's just too much. I think with Unicorn as well.
Just
we're going to see the extra pings, and it'll be
it's
very close, but
it's going to end up on about 26. So we've got 8 in hand, so bringing you up to 20. Is it 1 point again? Oh no, +2 from Stringer.
It'll be more with that, yeah, from the Stringer and the infantry as well pinging, so it'll be a tiny bit more, but still, Colomoan in a very end of Meave buff as well. It makes it a very, very close series, but has the better draws in round 3, has the better sequencing, saving the Anna Stringer for the very end, and still get a 10-point swing from her for the engine with the sequencing with the infantry as well. And he will finally win the second semifinal of the day.
Yeah, very unfortunate for Colomoan. We saw 2 draws there worth 4 points and some spicier targets in the deck, whereas Colomoan, you know, he got some pretty nice top decks. And honestly, the sequencing that we've seen by both of these players has been truly astounding. You see the handshake there on screen, 2-3. What a set, you know. Very, very close nail-biter.
Yeah, very clean play. We mentioned the very high chance of a game 5 because these players are very skilled, very evenly matched. I think they've shown over multiple tournaments. One player wins one time, then the next, and then you have the different decks and stuff. So in this case, predictions did come through. Game 5 was played. It was a very close series. We saw wins by 1 or 2 points every single time. And again, I loved watching this match. It was super clean and kind of the best Gwent you can watch right now.
And I think that's what Tailbot gets. He tells Colomoan, "Hey, you're in the top 20 players in Germany," and then he says, "Well, you know what? You're not."
The BM backfires, but I think he could still be quite proud of his performance. I think he played quite well.
Sure.
Again, misses out on the chance of winning the Open, so that curse remains till about, even though he's been dominant, he's won a Challenger, he hasn't won an Open yet. Coleman has, and he can make a repeat. He has to, still make it to the finals. It's going to be a really tough one.
And I don't think any player has actually won more than one Open in the history.
Freddie, you might have something to say about that. Freddie's won a whole lot of tournaments. That boy is skilled, but also a lucky boy.
I think just a Challenger and an Open and not 2 Opens, but you guys can double check and then tell me that I'm wrong on the internet at some point. But I think we have a little bit of time to see what Colomun has to say after that very close and very long set of games.
Well, that was long. Lots of roping, but I have a question actually that came from our wonderful chat on Twitch. Why did you decide to bleed in the last match?
Well, to be honest, I forgot that he had Gimpy in his deck, so I thought there wasn't really a punish. But so, given that he was running Gimpy, it was probably better to pass. I still think it's not that bad to bleed Nilfgaard in general, because oftentimes you can break up their Letho Orc Serret combo that you don't have those in all 3 in hand in round 2, and then they're gonna lose value on those cards oftentimes.
How do you feel going against Wangit in the finals?
Well, I think Wangit played extremely well so far. He has some interesting decks. I'm gonna try to study them now quickly. I'm not sure what my chances are. I think it might be quite even.
Do you think that because he's fresh blood and you're kind of a veteran here, you have the upper hand in some way?
Not necessarily, because like I said, the first 2 matches he played, I think he played almost flawlessly, so it seems like he's not really affected by pressure or anything.
All right, congrats, and we'll see you in the finals. Back to the casters then.